There is something deeply comforting about the Fallout universe, even with all its radioactive craters and wandering ghouls and desolate wastelands stretching out beneath a perpetually pale sky. Maybe it is the retro-futuristic aesthetic, that warm golden and amber palette that makes even ruined Washington, D.C. look like a postcard from a fever dream of the 1950s. Maybe it is the music, those scratchy, honeyed recordings of long-gone singers crooning about love and loss while you walk through irradiated swamps. Or maybe it is just the sheer density of secrets hiding in every corner, the feeling that no matter how many hours you sink into these games, there is always something else waiting for you, tucked behind a terminal, buried under a collapsed building, or sitting quietly in a fridge in the middle of the desert. This is a journey through that world, not a speedrun, not a combat guide. Just a slow, unhurried walk through the most fascinating, strange, funny, melancholy, and genuinely mind-bending Easter eggs, hidden details, and developer secrets scattered across every mainline Fallout game. The kind of details that reward patient players, the kind of stories that are worth settling in for. So get comfortable, turn down the lights if you want. Let the words wash over you like the static hiss of a Radiation King radio picking up a signal from somewhere far away. We begin at the very beginning, not the beginning of the games themselves, but the beginning of the world, the before. The pre-war era that the Fallout series only ever lets you glimpse in fragments. A promotional poster here, a company memo there, a holotape left behind by someone who no longer exists. Vault-Tec Corporation is one of the great fictional villains of gaming, not because they sent armies or monsters into the world, but because they smiled the whole time they were doing something terrible. Their corporate aesthetic is that of a mid-century American dream made slightly too bright, slightly too cheerful, the colors a little too saturated, yellow and blue, thumbs up. Everything is fine. Everything will be fine. Vault-Tec was, on the surface, a government contractor tasked with building fallout shelters across the United States ahead of the Great War. The nuclear exchange that the Fallout universe understood, at some level, was inevitable. Each vault was theoretically designed to protect a cross-section of humanity, to preserve the species, to keep the lights on while the world burned. That was the pitch. The reality, as players of every game in the series gradually discover, is considerably darker. Most vaults were never meant to save people in any meaningful way. They were laboratories, social experiments wrapped in concrete and steel and cheerful propaganda. Vault-Tec ran controlled trials on their own residents, testing everything from the psychological effects of complete isolation to the physical effects of untested pharmaceuticals, from the social dynamics of deliberately unbalanced gender ratios to the behavioral changes that come from living your entire life under fluorescent light, with no contact with the outside world. Each vault had a different experiment embedded in its design, and the residents, the ordinary families who trusted the company with their lives, were the subjects. This detail, seeded into the lore of the very first Fallout game in 1997 and expanded through every subsequent entry, is what gives the series so much of its quiet horror. The monsters in Fallout are rarely the ghouls and super mutants you fight through. They are the institutions, the smiling corporations, the well-dressed men behind glass who watched and took notes. And at the center of all of that, grinning with impossible cheerfulness, is the Vault Boy. If you have ever played a Fallout game, you know him immediately. The blonde, cartoonish figure in the blue and yellow jumpsuit, always smiling, always enthusiastic, always giving a thumbs up regardless of what is actually happening around him. He appears in the Pip-Boy interface, on perk cards, in promotional materials, in Vault-Tec advertising scattered throughout every game. He is the face of the franchise, as recognizable as any mascot in gaming history. His design was created by Leonard Boyarsky, one of the founders of the original Fallout at Interplay Entertainment. Boyarsky drew inspiration from two places: the visual language of 1950s, American popular culture, particularly its films and advertisements, and the look of the classic economics-themed board game Monopoly. That cheerful, slightly exaggerated, tilted hat energy. The Vault Boy is the Monopoly man given a radiation shelter and a slightly worrying amount of optimism. For nearly 3 decades, that cheerful little figure existed as a mascot. His origins, within the fiction of the Fallout universe, were never spelled out. He was just there, a piece of pre-war branding, something Vault-Tec made to sell their shelters to a nervous public. Then the Amazon Prime Video television series premiered in 2024, and everything changed. The show introduced Cooper Howard, played by Walton Goggins, a pre-war actor known for his cowboy films. Cooper Howard is likable, genuine, morally earnest in a way that feels increasingly out of place in the world around him. And through the story of how he became a spokesperson for Vault-Tec, how his image was appropriated and turned into something corporate and eternal, the show gave us the canon origin of the Vault Boy himself. Cooper Howard's face, his smile, his signature thumbs up, these were absorbed into the Vault Boy character through Vault-Tec's promotional campaigns. The gesture that became iconic, the one the Vault Boy is always making, originated in a safety instruction that Cooper himself describes in one scene. If you see a nuclear flash on the horizon, hold your thumb up against the sky. If the mushroom cloud is bigger than your thumb, run. If it is smaller, you are far enough away to be safe. A survival tip. A genuine, practical piece of wartime wisdom turned into a cheerful trademark for a corporation that was going to make sure the bombs fell regardless. It is one of the most elegant pieces of retroactive lore in the franchise's history. The thumbs up that always seemed so darkly ironic, the mascot of a company that was engineering civilization's collapse while smiling, now has a human being behind it. A man who gave his likeness to Vault-Tec without knowing what they truly were, who spent centuries afterward wandering the wasteland they helped create, gradually becoming something monstrous himself. The Vault Boy's thumbs up is no longer just a corporate logo. It is a ghost of a person who once genuinely believed things were going to be okay. That is the quality that makes Fallout's world so extraordinary. Even the mascot has a tragedy underneath it. The original Vault Boy design, created by Boyarsky and his team, also contains a detail that became an Easter egg entirely by accident. When Fallout 1 and Fallout 2 were released in the late 1990s for PC, their application icons, the small images that appear when you save a shortcut on your desktop, displayed Boyarsky's face at smaller sizes. But at display sizes larger than 32 by 32 pixels, a different face appeared. The face of Tim Kaine, the lead programmer and one of the founding architects of the entire Fallout universe, was embedded in the icon data at higher resolutions. This was not widely noticed at first, because most computers at the time defaulted to displaying icons at the smaller size. But as operating systems evolved and larger icon displays became standard, Tim Kaine's face began appearing on desktops everywhere, tucked quietly into the launcher icon of one of the most beloved RPGs ever made. For players who installed the classic games on modern machines, this became the default. They were running Fallout with Tim Kaine, watching over them from the taskbar, and most of them never even knew it. These are the kinds of stories that define what Fallout does with its secrets. They are not always spectacular. Often they are small. Often they require context that players have to piece together from scattered sources, from interviews and design documents and forum posts that are decades old. But when you find them, when you understand what you are looking at, the world of the wasteland feels a little warmer, a little more human, a little more alive with the fingerprints of the people who made it. Before we move forward into the individual games and their specific secrets, it is worth spending a moment with the broader philosophy of how Fallout handles its hidden content. Unlike some series where Easter eggs feel like an afterthought, a quick reference dropped in for a laugh, Fallout treats its secrets as an extension of its world-building. The game's environmental storytelling is legendary. You can reconstruct entire human dramas from nothing but the arrangement of skeletons, the contents of a refrigerator, a holotape left on a nightstand. The Easter eggs are woven into this fabric. They do not interrupt the world, they deepen it. This is a tradition that goes back to the very first game, released in October of 1997 by Interplay Entertainment. Fallout was a relatively small production by the standards of even its own era, a tight team of dedicated developers working on a post-apocalyptic role-playing game that drew heavily from tabletop RPGs, science fiction literature, and the retro-futurist aesthetic of early Cold War America. The team was small enough that their personalities and in-jokes leaked into the game itself in ways that were sometimes deliberate and sometimes entirely spontaneous. Tim Kaine was the creative center of that team, the programmer who had originally begun experimenting with GURPS-based game systems that eventually evolved into the SPECIAL system Fallout became famous for. Around him gathered a constellation of designers and writers whose work would define post-apocalyptic gaming for generations. Leonard Boyarsky, who handled much of the visual design and wrote some of the most memorable characters, Jason Anderson, who contributed to core design systems, and writers like Scott Benny and Marco Green, who gave the world its voice. And then there was the young designer who was invited to contribute to Fallout 1 but ultimately could not, who only joined the series in full for the sequel, and whose influence on Fallout's identity would become immeasurable: Chris Avellone. But we are getting slightly ahead of ourselves. The developers and their story is its own section, and it is a story worth taking slowly. For now, let us simply sit with the world they built and understand why, when they hid things inside it, those hidden things feel so worth finding. The Fallout universe operates on a principle of accumulated sorrow. Every building you enter was once someone's home or workplace or community center. Every skeleton was a person. Every holotape you find is a record of a real moment in a fictional life. The world did not end all at once. It ended in a flash, yes. But the suffering was in the before, in the slow, grinding escalation of the resource wars, in the casual cruelty of the corporations, in the willingness of institutions to sacrifice ordinary people for extraordinary power. Easter eggs in this world are not interruptions of the fiction, they are artifacts of it. When a developer hides their name in a gravestone or references their favorite film through a skeleton posed in a particular way, they are adding to the texture of a world already built from accumulated detail. The wasteland is layered with stories. The Easter eggs are just one more layer. Now, let us go deeper. If you are watching from somewhere around the world right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is, drop a comment letting us know your location and the time you are watching. It is always something special to see where these videos find people. And if you have not already, a subscription means these videos keep coming and they are always free. Now, back to the wasteland. Fallout 1 and 2, where the developers buried themselves. Fallout 1, released in October 1997, is a game that wears its development team's personalities openly enough that, in retrospect, the boundary between the fictional world and the real one feels surprisingly thin. The developers at Interplay were a close-knit group with a shared sense of humor, irreverent, self-referential, willing to break the fourth wall if it produced a good laugh, and that humor saturates the game from its earliest moments to its strangest corners. The most direct example is also one of the most delightful. If you go to the main menu credits screen and type the word "boom" while it is displayed, the game plays an animation of Tim Kane's head exploding. Not a graphic, violent explosion, a cartoonish one. The kind you would get if someone had pointed a cartoon cannon at the founder of the franchise and set it off with a smile. Tim Kane himself has mentioned that he discovered this Easter egg while investigating why the credits screen was making extra graphics calls. He had no idea it was there until he stumbled across it through debugging. The fact that his own head was the payload of the joke was a surprise to him personally. This is exactly the kind of story that makes the early Fallout development era so charming. A small team, close enough that pranking the lead programmer was a reasonable thing to do, loose enough that the prank could make it into the final shipping product without anyone officially signing off on it. The game is also full of named developer references that read less like Easter eggs and more like a collective in-joke extended to players who knew what they were looking at. Various NPCs and encounter characters carry the names of developers, references to personal relationships within the team, and inside jokes that would have meant very little to most players in 1997, but have since been documented and decoded by the Fallout community with archaeological precision. One of the most interesting of these involves Chris Avellone himself. A bounty hunter character named Chris Avellone appears as a random encounter in Fallout 1 placed there by programmer Jesse Heinig as a joke about Avallone's position relative to the project. As the Fallout Bible later noted, this character has no past and no future. He simply exists, appears once if you encounter him, and disappears. A mercenary without context or backstory, dropped into the wasteland as a playful dig at the fact that Avellone, though invited to work on Fallout 1, was not able to join the project and thus contributed nothing to that particular entry. Avellone himself, when asked about this character years later, said he did not particularly appreciate being put in the game without his knowledge. He found it uncomfortable rather than flattering. This human complexity, the fact that the same Easter egg can be a fond tribute from one perspective and an unwelcome intrusion from another, says something genuine about how game development actually works. Not everyone in a studio shares the same sense of humor, and not every inside joke lands the way it was intended. The reference persisted into Fallout 2, where the world opened up dramatically in scope and the developer in-jokes scaled up with it. Fallout 2 is, in retrospect, a game made by a team that was simultaneously very proud of what they were doing and completely exhausted by the pressure of following up one of the most acclaimed RPGs of its generation. The result is a game with extraordinary highs and some notable rough edges, and the Easter eggs reflect this same dichotomy. Some are brilliantly crafted. Others feel like they were dropped in at 2 a.m. by someone who had been staring at code for 14 hours. In Golgotha, the cemetery district near New Reno, a location named after the hill where the crucifixion took place, which tells you something about Fallout 2's approach to subtle symbolism, there is a grave marker that reads, Tim Kaine, founder, lover, fighter, programmer. It is a direct tribute to the man who created the franchise, embedded in the dirt of the digital world he built. Kaine had stepped back from Fallout 2's production before it was complete, having left Interplay under circumstances that were complicated by internal politics and pressure from the publisher. His relationship with the sequel was fraught. And yet here is his name, carved into a gravestone in the most Fallout way possible, commemorated in the wasteland, 6 feet under, with a slightly irreverent epitaph that manages to be both fond and darkly funny. The game also buries its developers in other ways. In New Reno, the adult entertainment district of Fallout 2's most morally complicated city, characters in certain venues will, if you engage them in conversation, mention the names of the developers who wrote them. Fluffers and other characters in New Reno will state that they were scripted by Tom French, and remark favorably on his gentle hands. Tim Kaine is mentioned as one of their regulars. Fergus Urquhart, the producer who was at the time running Black Isle Studios, the internal Interplay division responsible for Fallout 2, gets a name check regarding how many strippers were allegedly at his bachelor party. These are jokes that exist in the seams of a game rated for mature content, dropped into character dialogue in a way that most players would never think to probe for. The developers essentially signed their work in the most unprofessional venue they could find, confident that the players curious enough to look would appreciate the audacity. Fallout 2's relationship with its own developers goes even deeper through the Hubologist faction, which is one of the most cutting satirical portraits in the series. Found in San Francisco, a location Fallout 2 reaches in its later stages. The Hubologists are a religious organization that has developed an entire pseudo-spiritual system around alien technology and the idea of achieving transcendence by ridding the body of dynamic neurodyne energy. Their founder is named Dick Hubble. If you are not immediately recognizing the reference, this is a direct parody of L. Ron Hubbard and the Church of Scientology, rendered with minimal subtlety and maximum contempt. The founder's name is barely disguised. The doctrine is a point-by-point lampoon of Dianetics and Scientology's stated beliefs. 2 Hubologist characters in New Reno are named Juan Cruz and Vicky Goldman, a thinly veiled parody of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who were at the time among the most prominent celebrity advocates for Scientology. This is the kind of Easter egg that requires context to fully appreciate, and that aged in interesting ways as the decades passed. In 1998, the Cruise and Kidman parody felt immediately contemporary. Today it reads as a historical artifact, a preserved moment from a specific cultural conversation that has since moved on considerably. The Hubologist parody as a whole, meanwhile, remains one of the more pointed satirical inclusions in any major RPG. Fallout 2 is also where the series began to develop its tradition of referencing itself, creating connective tissue between games that rewards players who have spent time in the earlier entries. Characters from Fallout 1 appear in Fallout 2 in aged or transformed forms. Marcus, the friendly super mutant, was originally a soldier before his transformation and carries memories of the events of the first game. In dialogue, if you know what to ask him, he will describe experiences that directly reference encounters from Fallout 1. This kind of continuity was radical for its time. Most video game sequels were much looser in their relationship to their predecessors, and it established a precedent that the series would carry forward. There is a special encounter in Fallout 2 that references the Guardian of Forever, the time portal from the classic Star Trek episode, The City on the Edge of Forever. The Chosen One can stumble across this encounter and find a portal to other times, a concept that Chris Avellone himself worked on. It is a beautifully nerdy inclusion in a game already crowded with nerdy inclusions, and it signals the kind of science fiction literacy that the developers wanted the world to honor. The junkies in Fallout 2, after the Enclave has been destroyed, will sometimes be encountered in states of extreme intoxication. If you speak with them, they may state that they were designed by Chris Avellone and scripted by Thomas French, and therefore should not be considered responsible for their jet addiction. It is a moment of fourth wall breaking that is funny even without knowing who Avalon and French are, but lands with considerably more impact if you know the development history. The developers are deflecting blame for their fictional creation's poor life choices by implicating themselves in the most direct way possible. Jet, for the record, is a fictional drug exclusive to the Fallout universe, an inhalant manufactured from Brahmin dung that became one of the most powerful narcotics in the wasteland. Its inclusion sparked a real controversy when Fallout 2 launched, as the drug was presented with enough narrative texture that some players and journalists argued it was glorifying addiction. The developers responded by leaning into the dark comedy of the situation. The junkies got their dialogue. The developers got to claim co-authorship of the substance's popularity. One of the most enduring pieces of Fallout 2 lore involves the ending slides and what they tell us about the game's canceled or altered content. Fallout 2 shipped with endings for its major factions and locations, and several of these endings reference characters and storylines that either were significantly changed during development or were cut entirely before release. Careful reading of these slides reveals a game that was, in some ways, larger and more ambitious than what shipped a pattern that would repeat itself across the franchise. The special encounters in both Fallout 1 and Fallout 2, those rare, random events that could only be triggered by having a sufficiently high luck statistic, are their own category of hidden content. These encounters are wildly varied in tone and content, ranging from references to movies and television to seemingly random assemblages of absurdity that defy easy categorization. Finding them required both luck and persistence, since the game generated them randomly and some players went their entire playthroughs without seeing specific encounters. They became the subject of guides and wikis and forum threads dedicated to documenting each one, a community project that began in the late 1990s and has never fully concluded. There is a TARDIS encounter in Fallout 1, a blue police box that begins spinning and dematerializes when you approach it. Doctor Who, hiding in the wasteland with characteristic subtlety. There are references to Monty Python and various science fiction films and books. There is, in one encounter, a crashed alien saucer from which you can recover a uniquely powerful weapon, the first appearance in the series of alien technology, a thread that would be woven through every subsequent game. What these encounters have in common is a willingness to be genuinely strange. Fallout was a game that never felt it needed to protect its own seriousness. It understood that a post-apocalyptic world could contain both a devastating commentary on institutional cruelty and a joke about the USS Enterprise. These two things are not in conflict. They both reflect human experience, the part that grieves, and the part that laughs when there is nothing else to do. This dual register, this simultaneous seriousness and absurdity, is one of the franchise's most durable qualities. And it began here, in these two games made by a small studio in the late 1990s, with a founder who had his head explode in the credits, and whose face quietly watches over every new installation of the game from the taskbar. The Wild Wasteland and the Art of Organized Absurdity. When Obsidian Entertainment's Fallout New Vegas arrived in October 2010, it brought with it one of the most creative mechanical approaches to Easter eggs in RPG history: the Wild Wasteland trait. Not an Easter egg itself, but a system for enabling Easter eggs. A deliberate opt-in to weirdness. At character creation, players building their courier, the protagonist of New Vegas, a mail carrier shot in the head and left for dead in the desert, and now working their way through the political complexities of the Mojave Wasteland, could choose Wild Wasteland as one of their traits. A trait, in Fallout New Vegas, is a double-edged choice. It grants a benefit but also imposes a drawback. Wild Wasteland was the exception. Its only stated effect was, adds more wacky encounters to the wasteland, with the caveat that it was not for the faint of heart or serious of temperament. Taking Wild Wasteland meant opting into 15 major encounters scattered across the Mojave that simply did not exist in the base game. These encounters were indicated by a unique sound, a theremin hum, that wobbly, otherworldly instrument associated with science fiction films of the 1950s, and an on-screen message of 3 ellipsis dots alongside an image of the Vault Boy with spirals in his eyes. When you heard that sound and saw that image, you knew something was about to happen that was at least slightly unhinged. The encounters range from pure pop culture reference to something more genuinely surreal, and they are worth walking through in some detail because they represent a particularly thoughtful approach to fan service. Rather than dropping Easter eggs carelessly into the world, Obsidian made them optional, gave them their own audio signature, and ensured they had their own logic within the fiction. They feel less like interruptions and more like a parallel track. The game was always running a slightly weirder version of the Mojave that players could choose to access or not. The most famous Wild Wasteland encounter, and one of the first you can find if you know where to look, involves a refrigerator located just southeast of Goodsprings. The starting town of Fallout, New Vegas, Goodsprings, is a quiet desert community that functions as a gentle tutorial zone, a place to get your bearings before the wasteland opens up. Most players pass through it without exploring every corner. In that fridge, there is a skeleton. The skeleton is wearing a very specific hat, a fedora, tilted at a familiar angle. It is Indiana Jones. Specifically, this is a reference to the scene in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the 2008 fourth entry in the Indiana Jones franchise, in which Indy survives a nuclear detonation by hiding inside a lead-lined refrigerator. The scene was one of the most discussed sequences in that film, initially for how audaciously silly it was, and subsequently because it spawned its own verb in the cultural lexicon, nuking the fridge, a phrase used to describe a beloved franchise making an irreversible, logic-defying creative decision. Fallout, New Vegas found the most elegant possible way to comment on this. In a world where nuclear explosions are commonplace, where the bombed-out remnants of civilization stretch in every direction, the game put Indiana Jones in a fridge and killed him. The suggestion is gentle but unmistakable. In the real apocalypse, the fridge trick does not work. Indy does not survive. The hat is left behind with the bones. This encounter also yields a unique item that only exists if you have the Wild Wasteland trait, the Suave Gambler hat, modeled after the fedora. If you enter the experience without the trait, there is no fridge, no skeleton, no reference, just a stretch of desert. With the trait, Indiana Jones died trying to survive your world, and he left you his hat. A second encounter, discovered in the Old World Blues DLC when Wild Wasteland is active, involves 7 garden gnomes arranged in specific positions near a group of red stones. The gnomes are positioned as if mining, with pickaxes scattered on the ground around them. It is Snow White and the 7 dwarfs, rendered in Fallout's characteristically dark register. The gnomes are not cheerfully digging for diamonds in a forest cottage. They are mining in the ruins of what might have once been someone's garden, surrounded by the evidence of a civilization that ended badly. The dwarfs kept working after Snow White fell. It is a detail that is funny and melancholy in equal measure. Then there is the Holy Hand Grenade. In the basement of a church in Camp Searchlight, players with the Wild Wasteland trait can find 3 Holy Frag Grenades. Ordinary frag grenades renamed and reskinned to reference the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. The name is there. The appearance suggests something blessed and ancient. The function is exactly the same as a regular grenade, which is in itself the joke. The solemnity of the object, the grandiosity of its naming, the fact that it explodes like any other piece of ordnance. Monty Python's famous bit about the Holy Hand Grenade involves a reading of instructions so elaborate and pointless that it takes 3 full minutes to count to 3. New Vegas's version strips all of that away and leaves you with 3 grenades and the knowledge that the joke is in the name. The alien crash site encounter is one of the most mechanically significant Wild Wasteland moments. Without the trait, players traveling north of Horowitz, Farmstead encounter a mercenary camp containing a unique Gauss rifle called the YCS-186, a powerful energy weapon with a name that is itself a reference to the YCS Your Companions synergy build system from another game. With Wild Wasteland active, the mercenaries are gone, replaced by a crashed alien saucer and 3 hostile extraterrestrial visitors. The saucer design is directly modeled on the one from Fallout 3's Mothership Zeta DLC, creating a small piece of continuity between the 2 games. The aliens drop the Alien Blaster, an incredibly powerful energy weapon along with approximately 200 alien power cells that are the only ones available in the game. This is the trade-off embedded in the Wild Wasteland system. The Alien Blaster and the YCS-186 cannot both be obtained in a single playthrough with a single set of choices. You choose the silly version or the serious version. You choose the Easter egg or the unique weapon. This is smart design because it creates genuine decision-making around what is usually a trivial choice. Most Easter eggs cost nothing to encounter. Here you are paying for your weirdness with a piece of equipment. The CSI, Miami Encounter is another that rewards those who remember a specific television program fondly. In the Repcon headquarters building, players encounter a detective named Crusoe investigating a crime scene. Without Wild Wasteland, the detective is a more generic character named Jay Barnes. With the trait, Crusoe appears, a reference to David Caruso's character Horatio Kane in CSI Miami, who was notorious for delivering deadpan one-liners while putting on his sunglasses before the show's theme song kicked in. Crusoe is found standing over a body, sunglasses at the ready, and is dead himself when you arrive, the detective discovered on arrival, which is its own joke about how CSI investigations tend to go in fiction. The sunglasses can be recovered from his body. The Star Wars encounter plays out in Novak, the small desert settlement built around a decommissioned rocket factory. In the motel that serves as Novak's central hub, there is a sequence that references The Empire Strikes Back with deliberate economy, specifically the scene in Cloud City where Han Solo is frozen in carbonite. You will find a man trapped in ice, posed exactly like Harrison Ford, in a position that should be immediately recognizable to anyone who has seen the film. The frozen man cannot be interacted with in any meaningful way. He is simply there, preserved, like so much else in the wasteland. And then there is the Planet of the Apes reference, which appears not in a single encounter but in the Wild Wasteland ending slide for a specific playthrough condition. If you use the Lonesome Road DLC and choose to fire nuclear missiles at both Caesar's Legion and the NCR, the two major power factions the game asks you to navigate between, a unique ending slide appears. It shows the Mojave Outpost Monument, a pair of giant statues buried in sand, with the narrator making a direct reference to the final scene of the original Planet of the Apes. You maniacs! You blew it up! The courier, in this scenario, has essentially played the role of Taylor, crash landing in a ruined world and finding only the evidence of what was lost. The difference is that in New Vegas, the courier caused it. It is worth spending a moment on the philosophy behind Wild Wasteland before moving on, because there is something genuinely thoughtful about how Obsidian implemented this system. The trait made the weirdness opt-in. It respected players who wanted a more tonally consistent experience, while still providing a rich seam of references for those who wanted it. It gave the Easter eggs their own audio signature so they were never accidentally experienced. Every Wild Wasteland moment is announced, welcomed, its absurdity made visible rather than lurking. This is in contrast to the approach of most Easter eggs in most games, which are simply there, waiting to be found, making no announcement. Wild Wasteland moments are events. They have ceremony. The theremin hums, the Vault Boy's eyes go spirally, and you know that what you are about to see falls outside the normal register of the world. Chris Avallone, in interviews about New Vegas, noted that the Wild Wasteland trait was designed partly as a love letter to the special encounters of the original two Fallout games, those random, rare moments that required high luck and produced encounters ranging from meaningful to completely absurd. New Vegas systematized what was random in the originals, giving players control over whether they wanted that layer of the world active. It is a cleaner approach in some ways, and a more nostalgic one, a direct acknowledgement that the weirdness of the earlier games was not accidental, but intentional, and that its memory deserved to be honored. The Wild Wasteland trait could also be acquired mid-game through the Old World Blues DLC, specifically through the auto dock in the sink, a fully automated medical station you encounter in the Big MT research facility. This meant players who chose not to take the trait at character creation could still access the Wild Wasteland encounters by finding this late-game option, though with the restriction that the Alien Blaster could not be obtained if the YCS 186 had already been picked up. Every Wild Wasteland location already visited before acquiring the trait would retroactively shift to its Wild Wasteland form, which meant players could in theory reconstruct the Mojave with a different filter, applied same geography, different encounters. One final Wild Wasteland detail that deserves mention involves a small Easter egg within the Easter egg system. In the X8 Research Center of Old World Blues, after completing the high school testing area, players find a room containing 5 cyberdogs. In the vanilla game, the cyberdogs sit obediently in front of an image of Vault Girl petting a dog. With Wild Wasteland active, the cyberdogs are arranged around a table covered in playing cards, poker chips, and alcohol bottles. It is a reference to Dogs Playing Poker, the famous series of paintings by Cassius Marcellus Coolidge from the early 20th century, depicting anthropomorphized dogs engaged in a card game. The image is iconic to the point of cliché, and dropping it into a room full of experimental cybernetic canines in a retro-futurist research facility is exactly the kind of absurdist juxtaposition that Wild Wasteland was built to enable. Fallout 3. The Capital Wasteland's Buried Memories. Fallout 3 occupies a complex place in the series' history. When it was released in October 2008, it represented both a transformation and a risk, the first time the franchise had moved from isometric RPG to three-dimensional first-person open world, the first Bethesda Softworks production under the Fallout banner, and the first game set on the east coast of the former United States rather than California or Nevada. Washington, D.C. became the Capital Wasteland, the seat of a government that no longer existed, its monuments half standing in the radioactive haze, its history repurposed by the survivors who scrambled through its ruins. Bethesda's team approached Fallout 3 with evident respect for the franchise's history and its own distinct sensibilities. The result is a game that feels both deeply familiar to fans of the originals and thoroughly Bethesdan dense with exploration rewards, atmospheric to a remarkable degree, and perhaps most relevantly for our purposes, absolutely packed with hidden details and references. The most immediately striking Easter egg in Fallout 3 is also one of the most conceptually elegant. Hidden in the Chevy Chase district, a real neighborhood in the Maryland suburbs of Washington, D.C., here rendered as a Raider-occupied ruin, there is a monument. A large globe, with a small rocket orbiting it? Anyone who remembers the original Fallout games will recognize it instantly. This is the logo of Interplay Entertainment, the publisher and developer of the original Fallout games, rendered as a physical monument in the wasteland. Bethesda paid direct tribute to the company that built the franchise they had purchased and were now continuing. The Interplay logo, turned to stone and concrete, stands in the ruins of Washington as a memorial not exactly to Interplay itself, which was still technically operating as a company at that time, but to the era and the culture that produced the first games. It is both a humble acknowledgement of inheritance and a genuinely beautiful piece of environmental design. There is a companion reference to this tribute in the Point Lookout downloadable content, a DLC area set in the swamps of Maryland that is among the most atmospheric expansions Bethesda has produced. In the loading screens and scattered documentation of Point Lookout, references appear to a company called Isla Negra Holdings. Isla Negra is Spanish for Black Isle. Black Isle Studios was the internal Interplay division responsible for the original Fallout games and their sequels named after a small island off the coast of Scotland, chosen more or less arbitrarily by its founder, but carrying the studio's identity for its entire existence. By the time Fallout 3 launched, Black Isle had been disbanded for years, but the memory of it lived on in that Spanish reference embedded in Maryland swamp documentation, waiting for players literate enough in Fallout history to recognize what they were seeing. Fallout 3 also contains one of the most ambitious and fully realized secret locations in the franchise, the MDPL 1-3 power station, and more specifically the nuclear warhead it contains. The experimental MIRV is not simply an Easter egg, it is the most powerful weapon in the game, a modified Fat Man launcher capable of firing 8 mini-nuclear warheads simultaneously. Finding it requires navigating to Fort Constantine, a restricted military base in the northwestern corner of the map, solving a series of terminal puzzles using keycards scattered across different parts of the game world, and then opening a series of locked safes to access the launch codes. The effort required is substantial. The payoff is extraordinary, and more importantly, discovering the chain of clues that leads to it is a puzzle worthy of the effort. The Vault 77 jumpsuit, found in Paradise Falls, the slaver's camp that serves as one of the game's more morally uncomfortable locations, is a reference to a penny arcade webcomic strip that was written as a promotion for Fallout 3. The comic, considered canon within the game's lore, tells the story of a single man who is the sole resident of Vault 77, his only companions being a large box of puppets. The story of this puppet man has become a piece of Fallout 3 mythology that most players encounter only as a holotape nearby the jumpsuit, warning that the suit belongs to a legendary and feared figure who dismantled an entire slaving operation using only his wits and his sock puppets. It is at once an absurdist joke and a genuinely moving small story about what isolation does to a human being. The Dunwich building is perhaps the single most deliberately eerie location in Fallout 3, a derelict office complex in the far south of the map that, as you descend through its levels, becomes increasingly haunted by something the game never quite names. The building is named after Dunwich, the fictional Massachusetts town from H.P. Lovecraft's short story The Dunwich Horror, and the deeper you go into its basement levels, the more the game begins to feel like Lovecraft's brand of cosmic horror rather than post-apocalyptic science fiction. Strange visions play out. Feral ghouls behave oddly. The writing on the walls becomes less coherent. In Fallout 4, the Dunwich Borer's location, a quarry in the Commonwealth, continues this thread of implied eldritch horror, with holotapes that seem to suggest the workers at the site were being influenced by something ancient and incomprehensible buried in the rock. The thread is never definitively closed. That is the point. The Lincoln Memorial stands as one of Fallout 3's most pointed environmental statements, a monument to the emancipation of enslaved people, now surrounded by an ongoing debate within the game's fiction, between freed slaves and former slavers about whether to use it as a symbol of liberation or a fortified position. This location is not exactly an Easter egg in the traditional sense, but the weight of its real-world symbolism, deliberately colliding with a fictional moral argument in a game with real stakes, gives it a significance that rewards attention. The game's hidden alien presence, a UFO crash site in the Recon Craft Theta region of the Northern Wasteland, presages the Mothership Zeta DLC while existing as its own discovery. Reaching level 20 and heading to the Old Gullet Sinkhole near the Greentop Nursery initiates a sequence in which a UFO flies overhead, visible against the orange sky, before crashing. Following the crash site leads to the wreck and, nearby, a cave containing a lone alien, hostile, aggressive, carrying the alien blaster. This is a standalone Easter egg with genuine gameplay implications. The blaster is powerful, and the sequence of events required to reach it is almost theatrical in its staging. Bethesda understood that making players witness the crash before they could investigate it gave the discovery a sense of occasion that simply stumbling across a downed saucer would not. Fallout 3 contains what might be the most emotionally pointed Easter egg in the franchise, though it requires very specific conditions to encounter. In the universe of Fallout 3, the Brotherhood of Steel, a quasi-military organization of technologists who collect and preserve pre-war technology, maintains a close relationship with the game's protagonist. If you spend enough time with certain Brotherhood characters, listen carefully to their dialogue, and return to them at specific points in the story, fragments of genuine humanity emerge beneath the military formality. The Easter egg is not any single moment, but the cumulative effect of paying close attention to characters the game could have left flat. This is a pattern across the entire game. The skeletons posed in human moments, two figures embraced on a bed, someone lying as if they simply fell asleep, a family seated at a dinner table with no dinner are the game's most constant hidden detail. These arrangements tell stories without words. A man and woman lying together in a crater, clearly caught in the blast, who spent their last moment close to each other. A child's bedroom in an abandoned house, where the toy placement suggests a specific afternoon that got interrupted and never resumed. These are not Easter eggs in the strict sense, they are environmental storytelling, but the care that went into their arrangement suggests that someone on Bethesda's team was thinking about each one deliberately, imagining the moment it represented, constructing a small, silent fiction to inhabit that space. One of the funniest, strictly defined Easter eggs in Fallout 3 involves the player's personal butler robot, which can be obtained at Megaton. This robot, named Wadsworth, runs on Mr. Handy programming and will generate a new joke every day that the player chooses to interact with him. Bethesda programmed Wadsworth with a rotating set of deadpan observations and one-liners, and while the quality varies, some of them are genuinely sharp. I was going to attend a clairvoyance meeting, Wadsworth will tell you, in his perfectly modulated British-inflected synthetic voice, but it was cancelled due to unforeseen events. It is a clean joke. It should not work as well as it does coming from a rusty pre-war robot in a post-apocalyptic shack, but that contrast is exactly what makes it land. The Star Wars reference in the Mothership Zeta DLC is appropriately hidden within the DLC's most chaotic sequence. During the Among the Stars quest, a character named Sally says, while near the waste disposal area, "What an incredible smell you've discovered." This is the precise phrasing of Han Solo's line when Princess Leia successfully guides the group into the trash compactor in Star Wars. A New Hope spoken in the exact same context of an enclosed space filled with things nobody wants to be near. Sally is a child, which makes her delivery of the line simultaneously funnier and stranger. Children delivering pop culture references with complete sincerity are a Fallout tradition. The jar of Nuka-Cola Quantum is a collectible item in Fallout 3 that has an unusual real-world history. Nuka-Cola Quantum, a fictional variant of the franchise's ubiquitous soda, distinguished by its blue glow, became a real product in a limited promotional run through 7-Eleven in 2008 to coincide with Fallout 3's release. The in-game bottles, scattered throughout the wasteland as valuable collectibles, suddenly had physical counterparts that fans could actually purchase. This created a brief inversion of the normal Easter egg relationship. Instead of real-world culture appearing in the game's culture appeared in the real world. Nuka-Cola Quantum achieved a brief, genuine celebrity in the gaming community that no promotional tie-in quite replicated before or since. The TES-04 reference appears in Fallout 3, on a small plaque affixed to a road sign, a simple identification code, easy to overlook. TES-04 stands for the Elder Scrolls IV, Oblivion, Bethesda's flagship fantasy RPG that preceded Fallout 3 in the studio's release schedule. It is a way of signing the work a note from one game to another, from one world to the next, both of them built by the same team with the same engine in the same era. Fallout New Vegas carries the same reference, with TES-04 visible on utility poles in the Freeside district of New Vegas, proving that the tradition of cross-franchise self-reference was not confined to a single studio. New Vegas, deeper lore, and the Mojave's hidden architecture. Having walked through Wild Wasteland in a separate section, we can now spend time with the Easter eggs of Fallout, New Vegas that exist beneath that system, the references and hidden details that are always present regardless of which trait you chose, woven into the game's lore and geography in ways that only reveal themselves to particularly attentive players. New Vegas is a game built from accumulated debt. Obsidian Entertainment, founded in part by former Black Isle developers who had worked on the original Fallout games, was given approximately 18 months to develop Fallout New Vegas using Fallout 3's engine and assets. This was, by any reasonable measure, not enough time to build a game of New Vegas's ambition. The team worked at extraordinary speed. The game launched with a substantial number of bugs, and yet the final product is routinely cited by fans as the high point of the franchise, a game whose writing and moral complexity have never quite been matched. Part of what makes New Vegas's Easter eggs so resonant is that they are largely the work of developers who grew up with Fallout, who played the original games and loved them, who were doing their best in compressed time to honor a tradition they felt personally connected to. When Chris Avellone references the Guardian of Forever in Fallout 2, and then includes it again in New Vegas, he is not simply recycling a reference, he is carrying a thread through his own creative history. The character Marcus, the super mutant who appears in Fallout 2 as a companion and returns in New Vegas as the leader of the super mutant community of Jacobstown, carries this thread explicitly. In New Vegas, Marcus remembers events from Fallout 2. He can discuss his history, his former companions, the journey that brought him to his current situation. He is one of the series' most successfully maintained characters, a through line from the earliest 3D, adjacent Fallout to the modern era. Marcus also delivers one of the more quietly devastating monologues in the game, when discussing the nature of the super mutants' existence and the impossibility of their reproduction. He speaks about the community at Jacobstown with the tired pragmatism of someone who has lived long enough to know that some problems do not have solutions, only accommodations. It is writing of uncommon maturity for a genre that frequently handles such topics with less care. The passwords hidden in the eastern and western reflector control terminals of the Helios 1 solar energy plant are a particularly elegant piece of hidden design. The terminals require passwords to operate, and when players with sufficient hacking skill decode the passwords, they find them embedded in hexadecimal text. Decoded, the Eastern password reads, "Too many secrets." The Western password reads, "My voice is my passport." Both of these are famous passphrases from the 1992 techno-thriller film Sneakers, in which a group of hackers and intelligence operatives navigate an elaborate conspiracy involving a code-breaking device. The film's cultural standing in the programming and hacking community is significant. It presents the most technically literate portrayal of computer security of its era, and embedding its famous passphrases inside actual terminal hacking puzzles is a genuinely loving tribute. Most players never see these passwords. They either avoid the hacking minigame entirely or use brute force approaches. The passwords are Easter eggs inside a mechanic. requiring not just exploration but active engagement with a system that the game allows players to bypass. The achievement New Vegas Samurai references the 1982 film Six String Samurai, a post-apocalyptic road movie in which a musician and swordsman travels through a nuclear America to reach the only city left, Las Vegas, to compete for the throne of the dead Elvis. The film is a cult item, beloved in specific circles, deeply strange in ways that align perfectly with the Fallout aesthetic. The achievement's name and icon include guitar imagery and heavy-framed glasses, referencing the film's main character Buddy, who combines elements of both Buddy Holly and a samurai warrior. Finding this achievement is not unusual. Recognizing what it is referencing requires having encountered Six String Samurai, which is exactly the kind of mid-level obscurity that Fallout rewards. The Nightkin companion Lily Bowen carries with her a blade weapon made from a vertibird rotor, a large helicopter-like aircraft that appears throughout the Fallout universe. The specific vertibird that provided this rotor was, within the game's established fiction, the same one that crashed near Klamath in Fallout 2, piloted by a woman named Daisy Whitman. Daisy Whitman, now elderly, lives in Novak. If you have Cass as a companion when you visit Novak and repair the broken Mr. Gutsy named Rhonda belonging to the Nightkin leader Tabitha, the Nightkin now lucid enough to speak coherently will recognize Cass as the daughter of the woman from the crashed vertibird. The voices knew Flower Girl's father, the Nightkin says, connecting Lily's weapon to Cass's parentage to a crash site from a game released 8 years earlier. This kind of cross-referential connective tissue is extraordinary. It requires knowledge of Fallout 2 to fully appreciate, requires the player to have Cass as an active companion at a specific moment, and requires them to have completed a specific side quest at that moment. Most players never encounter this dialogue. The people who do describe it as one of those moments where the franchise's long history feels most concentrated and alive. The Lucky 38, the closed casino tower that dominates the New Vegas skyline and serves as the headquarters of Mr. House, contains its own layer of Easter egg history. Robert Edwin House, the pre-war billionaire who predicted the Great War, survived it in cryogenic suspension, and now runs New Vegas from behind a terminal, with his biological body barely kept alive by medical technology, is one of Fallout's most carefully drawn characters. His history, his philosophy, his relationship to power and to survival are all drawn with unusual precision. But the Easter egg within his narrative involves the question of what he looks like. For most of New Vegas, House is represented only as a pixelated face on a screen, an old man's face, rendered in the low resolution of pre-war video technology. His actual physical state is hinted at in documentation and in the endgame, but only partially shown. When the Prime Video television series depicted the pre-war House in Season 1 and showed him beginning the process of connecting himself to the Lucky 38 systems, it revealed details of his physical preservation that the games had deliberately left oblique. The show became the clearest statement of what was always implied in the game's fiction, a rare instance of an adaptation clarifying rather than contradicting the source material's ambiguities. The terminal entries scattered throughout New Vegas's various locations, its casinos, its military outposts, its caves and backrooms represent some of the richest concentrations of hidden lore in the series. The researchers at the RepCon facility left behind meticulous documentation of their rocket project, the personal frustrations of working for a defense contractor, and eventually, the specific moment when they understood that the rockets they were building might be the last ones ever launched. The Vault 11 documentation describes its experimental protocol. The Vault was told that one resident would be sacrificed to the Overseer computer each year, with the promise that compliance would save the remaining residents in the cold, clinical language of administrative cruelty. Finding and reading these terminal entries is optional, unrewarded with experience points, and completely essential to understanding what New Vegas is actually about. The name of the road connecting the major communities of the Mojave, the Long 15, and the I-40, and the stretches of cracked asphalt between them is drawn from the real geography of Nevada and the southwestern United States. Obsidian's team did extensive research into the actual landscape of the region, and the accuracy of its geography within the fictional framework gives the wasteland an unusual feeling of rootedness. The Vegas Strip, Freeside, Good Springs, Boulder City, these are real places, translated into the fiction with enough fidelity that someone familiar with the actual region can orient themselves within the game world with relatively little adjustment. This is itself a kind of Easter egg, the real world of the American Southwest, hidden inside the post-apocalyptic Mojave, waiting to be recognized. Fallout 4. The Commonwealth's Hidden Stories. Fallout 4 arrived in November 2015, set in the Boston area here called the Commonwealth, and brought with it both significant changes to how the franchise worked and one of the densest collections of Easter eggs in the series' history. The Boston setting gave the developers an extraordinary range of real-world history and architecture to work with. Colonial-era buildings alongside mid-century modernity, alongside academic institutions that have counterparts in the fictional universe. The Codsworth robot's name list is perhaps the most beloved Easter egg in Fallout 4, and it is one that the developers built deliberately as a kind of gift to the game's community. Codsworth is the household robot who has maintained your pre-war home for 210 years while waiting for your return, and he will address the player character by name. Bethesda recorded a large number of names for Codsworth to speak, over 1,000 at launch, covering a broad range of common names and some less common ones. But hidden within the official name list were Easter eggs. The robot will call you Fuckface, Fuck Stapler, and Fuck for Brains, speaking those names with the same cheerful domestic servitude he would apply to James or Sarah. He will call you Gru, after the famous creature from the Zork text-adventure games. He will call you Todd Howard, after Bethesda's executive producer and the public face of many of the studio's major releases. He will call you Dragonborn, the title given to the protagonist of Skyrim, but notably will not respond to Dovahkiin, the draconic term for the same thing, suggesting that whoever compiled the list drew a practical line at the limit of phonetically unusual words. More startling, Codsworth will call you Fallout 5. Someone on Bethesda's team, apparently, found it funny to imagine the scenario in which a player named their character after a game that, at that point, had not been announced and would not be for years. The robot will speak the name with the same warm familiarity as any other, addressing you as if Fallout 5 is an ordinary person standing in a pre-war suburban home. The connection between the Fallout universe and the Elder Scrolls, Bethesda's other major franchise, runs deeper in Fallout 4 than in most previous entries. The Nirnroot, a distinctive bioluminescent plant native to the Elder Scrolls universe, first appearing in Oblivion and featuring prominently in Skyrim, appears in Fallout 4 in the Biolab area of the Prydwen, the Brotherhood of Steel's flagship airship. The plant is labeled in the Biolab terminal as NRT-001, Nirnroot. It sits there, glowing faintly, in a world that otherwise has no connection to fantasy magic or Tamriel. The discovery sparked a genuine fan discussion about whether the two fictional universes might share some deeper cosmological connection, a possibility that Bethesda has never confirmed or denied, maintaining productive ambiguity. The Blade Runner references in Fallout 4 are numerous and carefully chosen. The noodle stand Power Noodles, run in Diamond City by a Japanese mister, handy robot named Takahashi, is a direct reference to the opening of Ridley Scott's 1982 science fiction film, in which Harrison Ford's character Deckard dines at a noodle stand operated by what appears to be a robotic cook who speaks only in Japanese. Takahashi in Fallout 4 responds to all conversation attempts with "Nan ni shimasu ka?", which translates approximately to "What will you have?" He cannot be persuaded, convinced, or debated. He only wants to take your order. This is exactly the kind of pure, purposeful reference that shows the team had thought carefully about what they were doing, rather than simply tagging a location with a recognizable image. The second Blade Runner reference is harder to find and considerably more affecting. On the roof of the mass fusion containment shed, accessible only by navigating a specific pipe around the back of the building, there is a scene. A synth, one of the artificial human beings whose moral status is central to Fallout 4's story, sits dead but posed, kneeling in front of a deceased man dressed in a long coat. The pose mirrors the final scene of Blade Runner, in which the replicant Roy Batty, having delivered his famous Tears in Rain soliloquy, sits down and dies, his artificial life reaching its programmed end. The man in the long coat corresponds to Harrison Ford's character watching. A white dove, held in the synth's hand in the original film, is represented by contextual details that suggest flight. Most players never climb up to this rooftop. There is no marker drawing you there. Finding it is a reward for the specific curiosity of investigating buildings' exteriors, rather than simply passing through them. The Vault-Tec phone number, 18884VAULTTEC, visible on in-game advertisements, is a real phone number. When the game launched in 2015, calling this number connected you to a recorded message themed around the game, featuring a Vault Tech operator describing the virtues of Vault enrollment with the appropriate cheerful corporate energy. The message has since changed as the promotional period ended, but at launch it was a genuine piece of transmedia Easter egg design. The game reaching through the screen and into the real world, a pre-war company calling from a future that existed only in fiction. The Vault Tech phone number was not alone in this cross-medium reach. In the lead-up to Fallout 4's announcement, Bethesda maintained a website, thesurvivor2299.com, that many fans believed to be a genuine ARG teasing an upcoming Fallout announcement. The site contained cryptic messages, countdowns, and content that appeared to be official. It turned out to be a hoax, created by a fan, but the official game that launched months later contained enough pre-launch ARG energy that the hoax felt like it existed in the right spirit. The community's willingness to believe it was a testament to how deeply invested players were in finding hidden signals from the developers. The Truman Show reference in Vault 118, accessible in the Far Harbor DLC, is deployed with elegant economy. The Vault was designed as a luxury resort for the wealthy, and among its artificial environments is a beach area. Above the beach, a large painting depicts a sailboat sailing toward a horizon. The composition mirrors the famous final image of Peter Weir's 1998 film, in which Jim Carrey's character discovers the edge of the artificial world he has inhabited his entire life and sails his boat directly into the painted backdrop. Vault 118's residents lived in their own artificial world, convinced it was real, until the experiment broke down. The reference writes itself. The environmental storytelling in Fallout 4 reaches some of its greatest heights in locations most players visit only briefly. The Mass Pike Interchange, a shattered highway overpass in the center of the map, contains evidence of a raider community that developed its own mythology and hierarchy over the 2 centuries since the bombs fell. Reading their graffiti and territorial markings tells a story of gradual organization, conflict, territorial expansion, and eventual collapse. There is no quest associated with any of this. It is just the archaeology of a fictional community laid out in spray paint on concrete. The house at the edge of Concord, associated with Henry David Thoreau, identified by a speaker mounted outside, playing a recording about the home's historical significance, contains the absolute minimum of furniture. A bed, a few chairs, a fireplace with bourbon. It asks players to sit with the silence of a space defined by deliberate simplicity in a game that usually rewards acquisition. Finding it, in the middle of a war-ravaged city, feels like stumbling across a pocket of genuine peace. The alien blaster situation in Fallout 4 is handled differently than in previous games. Rather than a single crashed saucer encounter, the weapon is found in a safe in the Toxic Valley region Appalachian in Fallout 76, but in Fallout 4 simply a radioactive zone southwest of specific landmarks. The discovery requires appropriate radiation protection, and the weapon, once found, is functionally interesting but ultimately less powerful than what players can craft with sufficient investment in the game's modification system. This shift from Easter egg as reward to Easter egg as reference reflects how Fallout 4 handles much of its hidden content. The act of finding matters more than the material payoff. Fallout 76 Appalachia's Buried Secrets. Fallout 76 arrived in November 2018 in circumstances that were difficult by any measure. An online-only Fallout title set in West Virginia, Appalachia, in the game's fiction launched with significant technical problems and content limitations that drew substantial criticism. The years since have seen the game substantially improved and expanded, with content updates transforming it into something considerably closer to what it was clearly meant to be. But the Easter eggs were there from the beginning. West Virginia as a setting gave the developers something no previous Fallout game had: a specific, well-developed regional mythology. The Mothman, the Flatwoods Monster, the Grafton Monster. These were real cryptid legends, genuine pieces of American folklore rooted in specific locations that players could, in the real world, visit and find documented in local history. Fallout 76 took this mythology and wove it into its world with considerable care, treating the cryptids not as jokes but as genuine entities within the fiction, with their own behaviors and ecological niches and even, in the Mothman's case, a religious following. The Mothman cult, a group of pre-war religious practitioners who worshipped the creature before the Great War and continued to organize around its presence afterward, is documented in holotapes, terminal entries, and environmental details scattered across the map. Finding the full picture of their belief system requires searching through multiple unconnected locations, piecing together documents that were never meant to be read together. The cult believed the Mothman was a divine messenger, a being that appeared before disasters as a warning. In the context of Fallout 76's timeline set only 25 years after the Great War, the earliest any mainline Fallout game has taken place, this belief lands with unusual weight. They were right that disaster was coming. Whether the Mothman was the warning or simply an observer is left deliberately ambiguous. The Torrance house in Fallout 76 is perhaps the most direct movie reference in the series. The Torrance family, residents of the Overlook Hotel in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, are memorialized in a house that shares their name, their dust-cloth-covered furniture, and their distinctive hedge maze. Walking through the maze guarded by a protectron that functions as an automated caretaker, a mechanical stand-in for the supernatural presence of the Overlook, leads to a specific discovery in the bushes. Jack Torrance's skeleton, axe still in hand, frozen in place exactly as he was found at the end of the film. The nuclear blast has preserved him in his final moment, which is exactly the kind of dark, lateral thinking that Fallout's best Easter eggs apply to their source material. The Titanic reference near Summersville Lake, a skeleton on a floating door, reaching down toward another hand just below the surface, is quieter and more melancholy. Without the context of the film, it is simply a strange arrangement of bones near water. With that context, it becomes a specific moment of loss. The two characters in the film's most debated scene, frozen in the pose that has been argued about for decades. Whether she could have fit on the door, whether the ending was necessary, the skeleton makes no argument. It simply lies there and holds the question open. The Breaking Bad reference requires exploration of a specific trailer park area. Walter White, the central character of the AMC series, a chemistry teacher who becomes a methamphetamine manufacturer, is represented by skeletal remains dressed in distinctive yellow protective gear, with a pink stuffed animal nearby, and chemistry equipment scattered around. The pink stuffed animal references one of the series' most persistent visual motifs, the eye from a children's toy that appears repeatedly throughout Breaking Bad's run as a symbol of collateral damage and the persistence of consequence. Finding this Easter egg requires knowing the show well enough to read the visual language Bethesda deployed. Watauga High School contains perhaps the most concentrated collection of developer self-references in any Fallout game. Among the classroom signs scattered throughout the school, teachers are named for specific Bethesda Softworks developers. Mr. Dobert is David Dobert. Miss Goodkina is Katya Goodkina. Professor Duval is John Paul Duval. These are not famous names even within the gaming industry. They are level designers and quest writers and technical staff who put significant time into building the game world. Their names appear on school signs in a post-apocalyptic high school, preserved as teachers in a world that no longer educates anyone. This pattern extends to other parts of the game. A holotape called 4 Rows contains a binary file that, when decoded, reveals the name of a Bethesda quest designer and writer. Several prisoner and guard names in Eastern Regional Penitentiary reference specific development staff, a warden whose first name matches a quest designer, prisoners whose names are variations on those of level designers. The game signs itself in dozens of small ways, many of them essentially invisible without dedicated investigation. The Alice in Wonderland reference emerges in a specific encounter area where carefully arranged items suggest the Mad Hatter's Tea Party, a table set with mismatched cups, a particular arrangement of chairs, a specific quality of disorganized abundance that evokes the famous scene from Lewis Carroll's novel. Finding it that requires spatial awareness of an area that has no particular reason to draw attention, and the connection to Carroll's work is entirely visual, no dialogue, no holotape, no documentation explains what you are seeing. The Pied Piper iBot is one of those Easter eggs that rewards patience rather than investigation. Wandering through West Virginia, players can encounter a specific iBot, the floating sphere drones that appear throughout the Fallout series that is playing music. Following this iBot reveals a pack of irradiated rats trailing along behind it, hypnotized by the sound, their path determined entirely by where the iBot decides to lead them. It is a reference to the Pied Piper of Hamelin, the German legend of a musician who led rats out of a town with his pipe, then led the town's children away when the town refused to pay him. The iBot will eventually lead its followers towards something unpleasant. The legend ends badly. So does Fallout. The developer room discovered by players who found exploits to access it in 2018 caused significant controversy. Behind the bounds of the normal game map, accessible only through specific technical exploits, developers had created a space containing every item in the game, a testing environment used to spawn and examine content without navigating the game world. A human NPC named Wooby existed in this space, there purely to absorb weapon testing. The discovery led to players obtaining unreleased items and selling them through various channels, which led to Bethesda identifying and suspending the accounts involved. The developer room was not an Easter egg, but simply a working environment that the game's online structure made uniquely problematic in a single-player game. Finding the developer room is just interesting. In a game where items have real economic value within the community, it becomes something more complicated. One of the more philosophically interesting Easter eggs in Fallout 76 involves the game's reference to its own number. Vault 76, the vault from which players emerge, was designated as a control vault, one of the few vaults in Vault-Tec's network that was genuinely meant to preserve and release its inhabitants rather than experiment on them. The vault was designed to open exactly 25 years after the war, and its 500 residents were selected as the best and brightest of American society, positioned to help rebuild the country. Whether this is genuinely true or whether Vault 76 was itself a more subtle experiment is a question the game's expanded content gradually makes more ambiguous. The number 76 is also the year of the American Bicentennial, 1976, when the country celebrated 200 years of independence with characteristic enthusiasm. A vault designed to restore America opened 25 years after its destruction, named for the year America celebrated itself. The symbolism is layered in a way that repays attention. Cut content, the things that never made it. Every Fallout game is, in its shipped form, a reduction of what was once planned. The gap between concept and delivery in large game development is enormous, and the Fallout series has an unusually well-documented history of cut content features, locations, characters, and storylines that made it into game files but not into the playable game, or that were described in design documents and developer interviews but never implemented at all. Fallout New Vegas's cut content is particularly extensively documented because the game was built on an engine whose file structure was relatively accessible, and because the community of data miners who examined it were both skilled and motivated. Among the most significant pieces of cut content in New Vegas is Vault 22's original scope. The vault that shipped in the game is already remarkably well designed, a greenhouse vault where a plant parasite evolved into a genuinely disturbing biological horror, but documents from the development period suggest it was intended to be considerably larger, with additional areas and a more complete picture of what happened to its population. Vault 24, which was cut from the final game entirely, became something of an urban legend among the New Vegas community. A Vault 24 jumpsuit existed in the game's files, a clothing item that could be extracted through data mining, but that could not be obtained through normal gameplay. The vault itself was never implemented. The jumpsuit was the only evidence of its intended existence. The Fallout television series' second season, set in New Vegas, brought Vault 24 into the canon, a significant development for fans who had been tracking this particular piece of cut content for 15 years. The show depicted Vault 24 as an existing location with its own history, drawing from nothing but the jumpsuit in the game files as a starting point and building the rest from scratch. It is an unusual case of a television adaptation completing something an RPG left unfinished, and it speaks to the kind of institutional knowledge the show's production team brought to the project. Fallout 4's cut content includes several vaults that were planned but not implemented in the final game. Concept art and development documentation reference Vault 117, Vault 113, and Vault 17, each of which would have added to the Commonwealth's underground architecture. Vault 17 is particularly notable because it is mentioned in Fallout New Vegas. It is the vault from which the super mutant companion, Lily Bowen, was taken as a subject for FEV experimentation. That the vault exists in New Vegas is dialogue, but not in Fallout 4's world. Despite the game being set in the territory where the vault would logically have been located, is the kind of continuity gap that the Fallout community has discussed at length. The planned duel with Elder Maxon was a significantly different potential ending to Fallout 4's Brotherhood of Steel content. When it is revealed that Paladin Danse is a synth, an artificial human, the game gives the player three options for handling the situation. Development documentation suggests there was a fourth option, challenging Maxon, the Brotherhood's leader, to a formal duel, the outcome of which would have allowed the player to assume leadership of the Brotherhood. This was removed before release, possibly because the timeline of the player character's relationship with the organization made it narratively problematic. A person who joined the Brotherhood a few weeks ago becoming its leader by killing the current Elder in a duel was, perhaps, a step too far even for Fallout's flexible moral logic. The copper horn planned for Fallout's early soundscape never made it to release, but fragments of its designed aesthetic influenced how instruments were handled in later iterations. Fallout 76 did briefly feature copper horns in its beta period, fully functional musical instruments crafted from goat horns and copper, available in 10 variants that each played 3 different tunes depending on how they were used, generating 30 unique sounds total. They were available in Pillager Outpost chests, had a 4-second cooldown, and were described by developers as social items meant for communication and roleplay rather than survival mechanics. Players enjoyed them. Bethesda removed them before the 1.19 release, citing that they did not meet the design team's goals for musical interaction. The instruments remain in the game's code, accessible through data mining, audible through audio files, entirely unreachable through normal gameplay. They are one of the cleanest examples of something the game almost was. The original Fallout's cut content reveals a game that was even more ambitious than its shipped version suggested. There were planned quests in the hub involving characters and storylines that were fully scripted but never implemented due to time constraints. The Boneyard was intended to host a more elaborate gang war with a full narrative arc. Several ending slides for factions and locations were prepared for scenarios that the final game's quest structure could not produce, showing players possible futures that would remain hypothetical. There was, in Fallout 1's development files, documented evidence of a cut alien encounter that would have been more extensive than the saucer crash that made it into the final game. In the Fallout Bible, a document compiled by Chris Avallone to address fan questions about the franchise's lore, there is a description of a planned encounter involving an alien body behind a broken suspension tank, a desk with a note nearby, and that note signed by Dana Scully of the X-Files. The encounter was fully conceived, placed in a setting, given its joke, and then removed before release, leaving only the description in a lore document that most players would never read. The development of the original Fallout involved extensive experimentation with how to handle the game's moral choices and consequences. Systems that were designed and discarded included a more robust reputation tracking system across individual settlements, a planned faction that was significantly redesigned before release, and several weapons that were modeled but never given appropriate game mechanics and so were cut from the item tables. Much of this material has been gradually reconstructed by community researchers through a combination of game file examination and developer interviews conducted over the subsequent decades. The pattern across the franchise is consistent. Every game shipped as something smaller than it was designed to be, and the things that were cut often tell their own story about what the developers were reaching for. The cut content of Fallout New Vegas reveals a game designed to be even more morally complex, with more factions to navigate and more locations to explore. The cut content of Fallout 4 reveals a game with more role-playing options and more creative freedom in its ending conditions. The cut content of Fallout 76 reveals an online game with more guided narrative and more persistent consequences than the final product could sustain. None of these Phantom games are the Fallout games that exist, but knowing they were once possible changes how you look at the ones that do. The released games are not failures, they are what survived the enormous pressure of bringing complex creative visions to completion within real constraints of time and budget. The cut content is the shadow they cast behind them, the evidence of ambition, imperfectly fulfilled, but still reaching. Developer signatures and the art of self-reference. One of the most distinctive traditions across the Fallout series, running from the original Interplay games through every Bethesda entry, is the practice of developers hiding themselves within their own work. Not just in names and references, but in the texture of how the world was built, in the choices that reveal specific personalities and tastes and senses of humor. Tim Kane's exploding head in the Fallout 1 credits is the most spectacular version of this, but it is part of a much broader tradition. In Fallout 2, as we have already discussed, the new Reno service providers reference their creators by name, turning a piece of adult content into a playful acknowledgement of authorship. The grave with Tim Kane's epitaph takes this further, giving the founder of the series a monument in his own fictional world. This tradition continued in Fallout 3, where Bethesda employees left their marks in subtler ways. The Bethesda Ruins, a named location in the game that corresponds to the real Maryland city where Bethesda Softworks is headquartered, exist as a raider camp. The company's headquarters, in the game's fiction, is a place that bandits have taken over and fortified. There is something genuinely self-deprecating about a company naming a ruin after itself, admitting in the architecture of its fictional world that no institution survives the apocalypse. Even game developers' offices become rubble eventually. The Fallout 76 developers' practice of hiding their names in school signs and prison records carries forward this tradition into a more systematic form. Rather than individual ad hoc insertions, the Watoga High School reference represents a coordinated act of institutional self-documentation, the entire team signing their work through the names of fictional teachers in a fictional school. It is the kind of thing that only makes sense in the context of a team that has spent years building a world together, finding a collective pride in the project that expresses itself through this kind of hidden permanence. Chris Avalone's complicated relationship with his own appearance in the Fallout games is worth returning to in more detail. The bounty hunter in Fallout 1 is only the beginning. A character named Mayor Chris Avalone appears in Fallout Tactics again without his knowledge or consent, and again without his providing voice acting for the role. A location called Avalone was named in Fallout Tactics as well. His name appears in Fallout 2's more adult-oriented content without any involvement from him, and yet he continued to work on Fallout games. New Vegas contains some of his most celebrated writing and continued to be visibly connected to the franchise's legacy. His public comments about these references over the years have been consistent. He found them uncomfortable. He did not request them. He would prefer they were not there. This discomfort does not appear to have been respected by all of his colleagues at all times, though the context of the early 2000s game development culture makes this less surprising than it might be today. Developer in-jokes were often made with a looser definition of consent than would be considered appropriate now. The practice of including people's names or likenesses in games without their full understanding continues to be a conversation within the industry. Leonard Boyarsky's contribution to the franchise's visual identity, the Vault Boy, the aesthetic language of the Pip-Boy interface, the retro-futurist color palette that defines how Fallout looks, is itself a kind of signature that persists through every game. Boyarsky was not the sole visual contributor to Fallout, but his design sensibility is so foundational that the franchise's visual language is in many ways inseparable from his personal aesthetic choices. This is its own form of hidden signature. The Vault Boy is not labeled as Leonard Boyarsky's creation in any in-game material. But every time you see that smiling face and that thumbs up, you are encountering the deliberate design choices of a specific human being. The tradition of developer self-reference also appears in small mechanical details that only experienced players notice. Certain terminal entry text strings reference internal development terms or project code names. Some item descriptions contain phrases that originated as team in-jokes. Specific NPC speech patterns reflect the writing styles of individual writers. These are not formalized Easter eggs, they are the natural residue of human personalities, asserting themselves within a creative project, the signature that any piece of genuine art carries, the irreducible evidence of the people who made it. In Fallout, New Vegas, the lyrics of the song Begin Again, which plays on certain radio stations in the game, were written by Chris Avalone. This is not advertised. The song appears as simply another piece of in-world music, diegetic sound in the fiction of the Mojave. Learning that the lyrics were composed by one of the game's lead writers adds a layer to the experience that is not available to players who encounter the song without that context. But the song works either way, which is the sign of a well-executed hidden detail. The Fallout Shelter mobile game, released as a companion to Fallout 4's launch, contains its own layer of developer signatures in its early builds. Individual vaults and overseers whose names correspond to Bethesda team members, visible in the game's management interface to players who read the procedurally generated names carefully. These references are necessarily more random and less intentional than those in the main games, since Fallout Shelter generates names from lists rather than having them hand-placed, but the lists were compiled by people who included their own names in the pools from which the generator drew. Skeleton scenes and environmental storytelling. The skeletons of the Fallout universe deserve their own dedicated section because they are arguably the franchise's most consistent and most affecting form of hidden narrative. Every game in this series contains them posed arrangements of human remains that reconstruct, in a single image, the last moments of someone who no longer exists in any other form. This is a tradition that began in Fallout 1 and has been elevated by every subsequent team to work on the franchise. The technique is deceptively simple: a skeleton, some props, a location with context, and the imagination of the player doing the rest. There is no dialogue, no holotape, no quest, just the evidence. Some of the most memorable skeleton arrangements are genuinely funny. A skeleton in a lounge chair on a rooftop somewhere in the Commonwealth, sunglasses on its skull, a bottle of something alcoholic long since evaporated, clutched in its bony hand, someone who saw the bombs coming and decided to watch from the roof with a drink. Not a bad way to go, all things considered. These arrangements respect the humor of the situation without diminishing its horror. They acknowledge that people facing extinction would have responded in human ways. Others are heartbreaking in ways that the game's normal content cannot achieve. Two skeletons in a basement, adult and small child, the larger arranged as if embracing the smaller. No explanation. No quest. No reward for finding it. Just the geography of a final decision to hold someone close until it ended. These scenes cost nothing to include a skeleton. Is a skeleton? The assets already exist, and they add everything to a world that is otherwise in danger of feeling like a series of locations rather than a history. The Fallout 3 Capital Wasteland contains dozens of these arrangements, many of them placed in locations that players frequently pass through without investigating the specific corners where the scenes exist. A family at a dinner table in an abandoned house, posed as if mid-meal, the food long since decayed to nothing. Two figures on a hotel bed in a room that is otherwise unremarkable. A single skeleton at a piano in a ruined concert hall, fingers still positioned on the keys. The last song played before everything stopped. New Vegas's skeleton tableau tend toward the Western genre's dark romanticism. The desert wasteland has its own aesthetic of exposure, bodies preserved rather than buried. Histories written in bones scattered across open ground. Finding two skeletons near a dry wash, positioned as if in conversation, the remains of a camp nearby, you understand that something happened here and that whatever it was, it ended with both people dying before they could leave. The world provides no caption. Fallout 4's skeleton density is remarkable. The Commonwealth is a dense urban environment with 2 centuries of subsequent history layered over the pre-war city, and the bones are distributed through this archaeological stratigraphy in ways that suggest genuine thought about where people would have been when the bombs fell. Skeletons in subway tunnels, caught in transit. Skeletons in apartment buildings, still in their beds. Skeletons in shops, behind counters, in positions suggesting that the last thing they did was their jobs, because they did not know in time that their jobs would be their last act. Fallout 76's skeletons carry an additional layer because of the game's timeline. Set only 25 years after the Great War, Appalachia still has human bones relatively fresh in the context of the apocalypse. The soft tissue is gone, but the arrangement of bones has not had as long to scatter. This means the poses are more coherent, the stories they tell more immediate. You can read more specifically what happened because less time has passed to obscure it. One of the most striking skeleton scenes in Fallout 76 requires traveling to a specific cliff edge where, visible below, 2 skeletons lie at the base of the drop. They are not positioned dramatically, they are simply there, in the aftermath of a fall. Whether it was accidental, deliberate, or something else entirely, the cliff provides no answer. The skeletons have been there for 25 years. The story they tell is sealed. The environmental storytelling extends beyond skeletons to every object in the world. Fallout's world is built on the principle that nothing is decoration. Everything has been placed, has a context, and tells a story if you understand how to read it. The specific brands of canned goods in a kitchen pantry tell you something about the economic standing of the family who lived there. The presence of medication tells you something about someone's health in the weeks before the bombs fell. The specific books left on shelves, the specific toys in a child's room, the specific music that plays from an abandoned radio, each of these is a brushstroke in a portrait of a specific human life, and the portrait is only complete if you stand still long enough to see all of it. The Pulowski Preservation Shelter's small, single-person pods scattered throughout Fallout 3 and 4 are a recurring dark joke about the inadequacy of civilian nuclear preparedness. Each one is occupied. Each one failed. The person inside died anyway, preserved in their small metal capsule as evidence that individual preparation was never going to be enough against what came. Finding these shelters feels different each time. Sometimes grimly funny, sometimes simply grim, depending on where you find it and what else has happened in the surrounding environment. Music, sound, and the atmosphere of the wasteland. The music of the Fallout series is one of the most distinctive and carefully chosen soundscapes in the history of video games, and it is worth treating it as its own category of Easter egg content, because the choices made in selecting and using this music are as deliberate and meaningful as any hidden reference in the game's geography. The decision to use pre-war music recordings from the 1930s through the 1950s as the ambient soundtrack of the post-apocalyptic wasteland is not a quirk, but a philosophical statement. The music on the wasteland's radio stations comes from a world that no longer exists, preserved in the amber of broadcast recordings and battery-powered radios, playing on in the ruins as if nothing had changed. Songs about hope and love and optimism playing over landscapes of total devastation. The contrast is never accidental. I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots opens Fallout 3 and has become perhaps the most iconic piece of audio associated with any game in the franchise. The song's title about wanting only to hold someone close, wanting to set nothing on fire, wanting only love to remain plays over images of a nuclear wasteland, a world where everything was set on fire, where love was among the casualties. The choice was deliberate, beautiful, and immediately established the emotional register the game was operating in. Mark Morgan, who composed the original ambient music for Fallout 1 and 2, created something that is genuinely unusual in game music. A score that is almost anti-melodic in places, built from drones and industrial sounds and dissonant electronics that suggest a world fundamentally broken at some level below the visible. Morgan's music for the original games is ambient in the most literal sense it surrounds, rather than foregrounds, creates mood rather than narrative, and rewards the player who is listening carefully while also functioning perfectly as background sound. The use of licensed music in Fallout 3 and subsequent games required significant research and licensing work that players never see. Finding recordings that were old enough to be authentic to the pre-war aesthetic but still recognizable and emotionally resonant was a curatorial project, and the results, the specific songs chosen for Three Dogs Galaxy News Radio in Fallout 3, or Mr. New Vegas's station in New Vegas reflect genuine thoughtfulness about what music a fictional disc jockey in a specific city would have found and preserved. Mr. New Vegas is himself a kind of Easter egg, voiced by Wayne Newton, the actual Las Vegas entertainer whose real name is Newton, who has performed in Las Vegas for decades and who is woven into the mythology of the city as completely as any building or casino. Having the actual Wayne Newton voice a fictional radio host named after his own association with the city is a piece of casting that collapses the distance between fiction and reality in a way that only works if you know who Wayne Newton is. For players who do, the voice is immediately warmly recognizable. For those who do not, it is simply a pleasant radio host voice. The Easter egg is embedded in the casting. Three Dog, Fallout 3's radio host, is voiced by Eric Todd Dellums, and the character shares significant personality traits with real-world radio personalities of the classic rock era. His speech patterns, his encouragement of the good fight, his relationship to his audience, these feel drawn from a specific tradition of late-night radio broadcasting that no longer quite exists. Three Dogs broadcasts react to the player's actions in the world, missions completed, factions joined, major decisions made which required Dellums to record an enormous amount of contingent dialogue. The sheer volume of this reactive content is itself an Easter egg of sorts, the evidence of an enormous investment in making the radio feel like a genuine presence rather than background noise. The ink spots appear not just in Fallout 3 but across the series as a kind of musical signature. They're recordings from the late 1930s and 1940s, characterized by the lead singer's remarkably delicate tenor, and the deep bass conversational passages carry a specific quality of beauty and melancholy that suits the franchise's emotional register perfectly. Maybe plays in one of the most emotionally charged moments in Fallout 3. It's all over but the crying, serves as a backdrop to some of New Vegas's quieter sequences. The specific albums and recordings that were licensed for each game are themselves a kind of hidden knowledge. Knowing which recordings are authentic period pieces and which were created specifically for the franchise is a distinction that only music historians would likely make, but the care taken to ensure authenticity is audible. The ambient sound design in the Fallout games, separate from the music, is worth its own appreciation. The specific way that wind sounds in the Capital Wasteland versus the Mojave Wasteland versus Appalachia. The particular quality of footsteps on different surfaces, dirt, concrete, metal grating, the specific crunch of irradiated gravel, the sounds of creatures at different distances, the audio cues that tell you something is nearby before you can see it. These sounds are not Easter eggs in the strict sense, but they represent the same kind of invisible craftsmanship, choices made by specific people that shape the player's experience without ever being credited or acknowledged. One genuine audio Easter egg in Fallout 4 involves the number 1-800-117-1775. This number, visible on certain in-game advertisements, corresponds to a historical date, 1775, the year of the Battle of Bunker Hill. The area around Bunker Hill is a significant location in Fallout 4's story, home to a merchants organization with its own complicated loyalties. The number encoding a historical date in the context of a real location repurposed for a fictional faction is the kind of detail that layers history on top of fiction in a way that rewards players who catch it. The Nuka World DLC for Fallout 4 contains an amusement park themed entirely around the franchise's own fictional cola brand, and within that park, the music, the atmosphere, and the overall aesthetic are themselves Easter eggs about the nature of branding and nostalgia. Nuka World as a location is a satire of real theme parks built around commercial brands, filtered through 2 centuries of post-apocalyptic decay. The rides still partially function. The theme music still plays. The mascots still wander the Midway, now as feral robots following their original programming long after anyone has thought to update them. The park is a monument to corporate entertainment's attempt to make consumption feel like joy, and to what happens to that monument when the civilization that produced it ends. Closing the wasteland never runs out of secrets. We have been walking for a long time now. The sun, or whatever passes for the sun over the wastes, has moved across a sky the color of old amber. The radio is playing something quiet, something recorded before any of us were born, crackling and warm and impossibly distant. Somewhere in the distance, something is settling in the ruins, just the world adjusting to its own weight. The Fallout series has now been alive for nearly 30 years. It began in 1997 with a small team building a post-apocalyptic RPG on modest technology, and it has grown into one of the most recognized franchises in the history of the medium. Games, novels, tabletop adaptations, and now a television series that has introduced the Wasteland to an entirely new audience. The franchise has survived the closure of the studio that created it, the purchase of its intellectual property by a new company, the expansion to 3-dimensional graphics, the transition to online multiplayer, and an ongoing television adaptation that is building its own canon alongside the games. Through all of this, the Easter eggs have persisted. Every team that has worked on a Fallout game has participated in the tradition of hiding things for patient players to find, of signing their work in secret, of treating the game world as a space large enough to contain both the story and the stories behind the story. This continuity of approach across different studios, different decades, different platforms and genres suggests that the practice is not arbitrary but foundational. It reflects something true about what these games are and what they value. Fallout games value the curious player. The player who reads every terminal entry, who investigates every building, who looks in every fridge, and behind every overturned car. These games are built to reward that curiosity, not just with loot but with understanding, with the sense that the world is fuller than it appears, that every surface hides a depth, that paying attention is itself a kind of gameplay. The Easter eggs are the purest expression of this value. They give nothing to players who pass through quickly. They give everything to players who slow down. A skeleton on a rooftop with a drink in its hand means nothing to someone who glances at it from 50 feet away. It means everything to someone who climbs up to it, examines it, thinks about who it might have been, and what they were looking at when the sky lit up. This is what the franchise has always been about. Underneath the combat systems and the faction politics and the settlement building and all the other mechanical layers, It is about paying attention to a world that ended. It is about treating the remains of a civilization, even a fictional one, with the care of someone who wants to understand rather than simply survive. The developers who built these worlds understood that. Tim Kaine understood it in 1997 when he let someone put his exploding head in the credits. Chris Avellone understood it when he wove decades of cross-referential lore into a game built in 18 months. Obsidian's team understood it when they created the Wild Wasteland trait, a formalized way of saying that there is a version of this world that is stranger than it appears, and you can choose to see it or not. Bethesda's teams understood it when they built a monument to Interplay in the ruins of Chevy Chase and named a raider camp after their own headquarters. The Fallout 76 team understood it when they named fictional school teachers after the people who built the building those teachers inhabit. All of these people, working across different studios in different decades, were doing the same thing, hiding themselves in their own work, finding ways to persist in a fictional world they were building for other people to explore, leaving evidence that they were here, that they made this, that they cared enough to leave something extra for the people who cared enough to look. The Wasteland never runs out of secrets. That is not a feature of any particular game or any particular setting. It is a feature of human creativity. Every act of genuine creation leaves traces of the people who made it, some intentional, some accidental, some understood only in retrospect. The Fallout series happens to be unusually self-aware about this. It makes the hiding of secrets a tradition rather than an accident. It builds worlds large enough to contain not just the story, but the stories that generated the story. Somewhere in the digital ruins of the Capital Wasteland, Tim Kaine's name is on a gravestone. Somewhere in the Mojave, Indiana Jones is in a fridge. Somewhere in the Commonwealth, a robot will call you fuck stapler with cheerful professionalism. Somewhere in West Virginia, Jack Torrance's skeleton is frozen in a hedge maze, finally at rest. These things will be there forever, or close enough to forever to matter. They were put there by people who wanted to leave something behind in a world full of beautiful, broken things, which is, come to think of it, exactly what the Fallout universe is about. Thank you for spending this time in the Wasteland. If you found something here worth staying for a detail that caught your attention, a mail in differently than you expected, a connection you had not made before, then this was worth making. The best Easter eggs are the ones that make you see something familiar in a new way. The best stories are the ones that reward the slow reading. The radio is still playing. The static sounds like breathing. Somewhere out there, the sun is rising over ruins that were once someone's home, and the world keeps turning, and none of the secrets have stopped being hidden just because we found a few of them. There are always more. There always will be. If you enjoyed your time here, leaving a like helps more people find their way to these long, slow explorations of the things hiding in games you love. A subscription means you will be here for the next one, and there will always be a next one. The Wasteland is enormous, and we have barely started. Stay curious, stay patient. The best things are always waiting for the players who take their time. The architecture of a fictional apocalypse. Before we carry forward into more specific game content, it is worth spending a little more time with the philosophical underpinning of why Fallout's world feels so rich, because understanding that architecture helps explain why the Easter eggs feel like they belong there, rather than feeling grafted on. The world of Fallout is, at its heart, a thought experiment. What if the Cold War never ended? What if the tension of the 1950s, the duck and cover drills, the backyard bomb shelters, the cheerful propaganda about nuclear readiness simply continued escalating, rather than finding the various de-escalating moments that shaped the actual second half of the 20th century? What would an America look like that never had the 1960s, never had the counterculture or the civil rights movement's full legislative victories or the slow softening of Cold War iconography, but instead just kept pushing forward with the aesthetic and ideology of the Eisenhower era until the bombs finally came? This premise produces a world with remarkable internal consistency. The pre-war aesthetic of Fallout is not simply retrofuturism as design choice. It is retrofuturism as logical consequence. Cars run on nuclear power because the real-world shift toward petroleum alternatives that began in the 1970s never happened in Fallout's timeline. Robots were developed along lines informed by 1950s science fiction's vision of what robots would look like. The corporations that produced consumer goods kept the styling conventions of 1950s advertising, because there was never a decade of cultural disruption to force anything new. This internal logic means that the Easter eggs, when they reference the real world, are always doing something slightly complicated. A reference to Star Wars in the Fallout universe raises an implicit question. Did Star Wars exist in this timeline? Did George Lucas still make that film? Did popular culture diverge along with political and technological culture? The games never address this directly, and the Easter eggs are generally understood to be fourth wall nods, the developers acknowledging the real world through the membrane of the fiction rather than genuine claims about what the fictional universe contains. There are exceptions. The Hubologist faction in Fallout 2, parodying Scientology, is presented as something that exists within the fiction, a real religious movement with real adherents in the Fallout universe. The developers are not simply nodding at Scientology from outside the fiction, they are placing a Scientology analog inside it. The same is true of various political and corporate satires scattered through the games. The line between fourth-wall Easter egg and in-world satire is something the Fallout series navigates with casual flexibility, and part of what makes the world feel so alive is that it is always doing both simultaneously. The Vault experiments deserve more attention than they typically receive in discussions of Fallout Easter eggs, because they are themselves a form of hidden content knowledge that rewards players who read terminal entries and holotapes carefully, building up a picture of Vault-Tech's full program across all the games they explore. Vault 11 in New Vegas housed an experiment of particular cruelty. Its residents were told that they must sacrifice one of their own to the Overseer computer each year, a human sacrifice demanded by an institution framed as their savior. They were not told that compliance was the experiment, that the Vault's actual design was to see how long a community would endure this demand before rebelling. The residents of Vault 11 organized, politicized, formed factions, elected representatives, and found ways to defer the choice to others. 5 residents eventually staged a violent revolt against the system, killing the security forces, destroying the Vault's automated defenses, and then receiving a message from the Overseer computer. The Vault was unlocking. They had passed the experiment. They were free to leave. Only 5 of them walked out. The rest of the Vault's population had died in the years of sacrifice and the final revolt. The 5 survivors sat together in the sunlight outside the Vault entrance, having won their freedom at the cost of everything that was supposed to make freedom meaningful. The game presents this through a series of terminal entries and audio logs, scattered across Vault 11's interior, that a thorough player can reconstruct in sequence. No quest marker guides you to this story. No journal entry tracks it. You simply read, and read, and read, until you understand what happened. This is Fallout's most powerful technique. The Easter egg as tragedy, the hidden content that reveals not a joke, but a wound. Vault 21 in New Vegas is a lighter example, but no less carefully constructed. The Vault's experiment was that all disputes were resolved by gambling, and the Vault's most successful gambler, a woman named Sarah Weintraub, essentially won the entire Vault through years of sustained winning. The Vault's social structure evolved around this rule until Mr. House appeared at their door and offered to buy them out. The Vault was sealed and converted into a hotel. Sarah still runs the hotel, still gambles, still is the most successful gambler you will ever meet in New Vegas. Her entire life has been shaped by a Vault-Tech social experiment she cannot quite shake. Vault 81, in Fallout 4, was designed to test experimental cures for various diseases using the Vault's residents as unwitting test subjects. The Vault scientists eventually recognized what they were being asked to do and sabotaged the experiment, hiding the test subjects, faking the data, continuing to live in the Vault rather than conduct the research. By the time the sole survivor arrives, Vault 81 is a functioning community that has spent 200 years not knowing that its intended purpose was to treat them as laboratory animals. One child in the Vault is still infected with the disease the experiment was supposed to cure. The cure exists, locked in a sealed section of the Vault along with the body of the doctor who protected the residents. Finding it requires navigating through irradiated chambers that have been sealed for generations. These vaults are Easter eggs in the original sense of the term hidden content that rewards investigation. They are also something more than that, meditations on the nature of trust, on what institutions do to the people who depend on them, on the long shadow that someone else's decision casts over generations who never chose it. The Mojave's quieter corners. Returning to New Vegas with fresh attention, there are sequences and locations and details that deserve more thorough examination. Things that exist outside the wild wasteland system. and that reveal the game's extraordinary attention to the texture of its world. The casino floor of the Lucky 38 is one of the most carefully designed rooms in the game that almost no player spends time in. The Lucky 38 is closed to the public. In the fiction, it has been shuttered since before the Great War, and its casino floor, when you finally gain access to it, is perfectly preserved. The slot machines still wait. The felt on the card tables shows no wear. The chips are still stacked. It is the most pristine environment in New Vegas, and it is a monument to Mr. House's control of time as much as anything else. He kept the bomb from falling on his casino. He kept it clean. He has been waiting, in his perfectly maintained domain, for someone worth talking to. Finding the various terminals that document House's pre-war history, his work at Robco, his early deployment of the Securitron security system, his calculation of the Great War's probability and date, is assembling a portrait of a man who saw the apocalypse coming and decided to survive it through sheer force of will and technological preparation. House predicted the bombs would fall in October of 2077. He was off by a few weeks. He still considers this a failure of his predictive modeling. The Bison Steve Hotel in Prim contains a roller coaster, and riding the roller coaster is one of the more unexpected experiences in the game, an amusement ride still operational after 2 centuries, taking you through a circuit of what was clearly a very small theme park experience, looking out over the surrounding desert. The physics are not entirely realistic. The thing moves faster than it probably should, but there is something genuinely delightful about a post-apocalyptic roller coaster that still works, rattling along its rails above the wasteland, and the developers clearly knew it. They made the ride accessible and functional, specifically so players could experience that delight. Jacobstown, the super mutant community in the mountains west of New Vegas, contains Easter eggs of a subtler kind, the evidence of what a community of people who were once ordinary humans, transformed into something they did not choose, might build for themselves. The Jacobstown Lodge still serves food. The residents have developed something like culture in the decades since the community formed. Marcus, their leader, reads during quiet hours. There is a doctor in residence. There are routines and social structures and small dignities maintained against considerable odds. Finding Jacobstown after hours of combat-heavy exploration is itself a kind of Easter egg, the surprise of a community that is not a threat but a neighbor. The conversation with Cannibal Johnson, accessible in a specific cave in the Mojave if you know where to look, is one of the game's most unexpectedly melancholy moments. Johnson is an elderly man, a former Enclave soldier who left the organization decades before the game's events when he could no longer justify their actions. He lives alone in a cave with the memories of who he was. Speaking with him reveals a complete life history, a person with genuine regret, genuine self-knowledge, and a specific way of having arrived at his current circumstances. He is not a quest giver. He cannot be recruited. He offers nothing mechanical. He is simply a very old man in a cave who will tell you his story if you ask. The Mojave Outpost, at the southern end of the map, contains a pair of massive statues that have become one of the game's most recognizable visual elements. They depict a soldier and a civilian clasping hands, a monument to either the alliance between the NCR and its citizens or simply to the ideal of mutual aid in the wasteland. The statues were placed there because the location is a crossroads, a place where travelers from different directions converge, and monuments mark crossroads. Finding the small details around the base of the statues, the names of the donors who contributed to the monument's construction, the dedication text, the specific political language of the NCR's civic culture turns an impressive visual element into a window onto a civilization trying to rebuild itself with the tools of the old world. The radio signal mysteries of New Vegas, the frequencies that players can tune to and that play strange, distorted content, are their own category of hidden discovery. Some of these signals lead to specific locations when investigated. Others appear to be random noise that contains no discoverable content. The community of players who have investigated these signals has produced a body of documentation distinguishing the genuine leads from the dead ends, a kind of collective archaeology of the game's audio landscape. The test for players who have completed the game's various endings involves listening to the narrator's closing summary with specific attention to what is said about background factions. The Followers of the Apocalypse, a medical and educational organization that tends to be underrepresented in discussions of the game's main conflict, have ending slides that describe their long-term work in ways that only make sense if you have paid attention to their specific mission. Throughout the game, Their ideal ending, in which they continue their work of treating and educating wasteland communities, is achieved not through dramatic confrontation but through consistent support during the course of the main story. It is an Easter egg of moral outcome, the faction that rewards quiet, consistent ethical behavior rather than spectacular heroics. The Capital Wasteland's deeper memories. Fallout 3's Washington, D.C. setting created an unusual opportunity, a real city with a documented history of real political events, translated into a fiction where those events took a different shape. The Lincoln Memorial content discussed earlier is one example. There are many others, scattered through the game's geography in ways that reward players familiar with the actual history of the city. The Museum of History, located in the southwest of the map, contains exhibits on the pre-war period that blend real historical content with the alternate history of Fallout's timeline. Walking through the museum's halls, reading plaques about historical events that largely parallel our own timeline through the mid-20th century and then begin to diverge, creates a specific feeling, the sense of being adjacent to a history that is almost, but not quite your own. The exhibits discussing the resource wars and the American annexation of Canada are presented in the same institutional language as exhibits about World War II, with the same authoritative tone, the same attempt at neutral description. The game is very good at making the fictional history feel like history. The National Archives, accessible as part of the main story, contains the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, and other founding documents, protected in their display cases by an automated security system, still faithfully following a program to defend the nation's paperwork long after the nation has ceased to exist. Sydney, the scavenger who can be an ally in navigating the archives, is one of the game's most fully realized minor characters, someone with a complete history and personality who the player encounters in a single location and never meets again. Finding her backstory through her own holotapes and dialogue requires paying attention in a way that most players don't, and the payoff is not a quest reward but simply the satisfaction of understanding a person. Rivet City, the aircraft carrier converted into a settlement, is the closest thing to a city that the Capital Wasteland has, and its interior is organized with an attention to social detail that is easy to miss when navigating through it efficiently. The science lab occupies the carrier's research section. The marketplace takes up the central area. Residential sections are arranged by social status in ways that parallel how real urban communities organize themselves. The relationship between Rivet City's various factions, the scientists, the merchants, the security staff, the religious community is a miniature civilization, complete with internal politics and historical grievances. Finding all of this requires speaking to people rather than simply passing through them. The Gallo family holotapes, scattered through Rivet City, document a specific domestic drama from before the Great War. The family had connections to Rivet City's predecessor, the actual aircraft carrier, before its conversion, and their descendants are among the settlement's current residents. The holotapes tell a story of a family dealing with the specific stresses of late pre-war life, resource shortages, increasing militarization, the sense that something was coming without knowing exactly what. Assembling their story requires finding holotapes across multiple locations, and the complete picture is accessible only to players who specifically seek it out. The super mutant behavioral ecology of the Capital Wasteland, the way they have organized their territory, the specific locations they have chosen to fortify, the evidence of something resembling a culture developing in their communities is a topic the game gestures at through environmental detail rather than explicit documentation. Master overlords and super mutant behemoths occupy specific positions in their hierarchy. Finding and examining this hierarchy, understanding where resources concentrate in their organization and why, turns what appears to be random enemy placement into something that looks more like an ecosystem. Commonwealth stories in detail. The settlement system of Fallout 4, which allows players to build and manage communities across the Commonwealth, is itself an Easter egg of design intent, a system that rewards the specific emotional response of wanting to create order from chaos, to build home where there is only ruin. The mechanics of this system have been discussed extensively in the context of gameplay, but the aesthetic of it deserves attention. Every settlement location in Fallout 4 was chosen deliberately. They are all places that have a pre-war history, a farm, a castle, a drive-in theater, a factory, an oil rig, and that history informs what a rebuilt settlement in that location would feel like. Building a settlement on Spectacle Island, a large island far to the east of the main map, requires clearing a derelict ship and establishing infrastructure on a piece of land with no road access. The difficulty of that project is the point. Settlements in hard-to-reach places would be hard to reach for a reason, and the reward for building there is a strategic location that is easy to defend and hard to attack. Spectacle Island itself contains a specific Easter egg in its boat, the remains of a vessel that can be explored, that contains documentation of its last voyage. The ship was carrying cargo that, in the fiction of the Fallout universe, was part of a supply chain that tells a larger story about the pre-war economy of the Boston area. Finding this documentation requires exploring the ship carefully, diving through flooded sections, navigating damage from the centuries since the war. The Cambridge Polymer Labs location houses one of the game's most quietly devastating terminal stories. A team of researchers working on a pre-war materials science project was sealed into their facility when the bombs fell. Their automated systems continued operating according to their programming. The researchers slowly died. Some immediately, some later, all of them having left behind documentation of their process and their awareness that they were not going to be rescued. The last terminal entry is from the final surviving researcher, writing not about the project but about what she wished she had done differently. This is a story told entirely through terminal entries in a side location with no quest attached. It is discoverable only by players who explore Cambridge thoroughly and who take the time to read the documentation they find. The game rewards neither the exploration nor the reading with any mechanical benefit. It simply puts the story there, in a laboratory in Cambridge, for someone to find. The Freedom Trail, a quest that guides the player to the railroad headquarters through a series of clues embedded in a literal painted trail on the ground, is an Easter egg of the city of Boston itself. The Freedom Trail is a real historical walking tour in Boston, Massachusetts. A 2.5-mile path, marked by a red line on the ground, connecting 16 historically significant sites related to the American Revolution. Fallout 4 repurposes this trail as a quest mechanic, connecting it to the railroad's ideology of liberation and its historical analog, the Underground Railroad. The decision to use a real Boston landmark as a genuine gameplay mechanic is an example of how the game integrates its setting with its content in ways that reward knowledge of the actual city. The Boston Bugle newspaper, scattered throughout the Commonwealth as environmental detail, documents the last weeks before the Great War through headlines and articles that capture the specific flavor of late pre-war anxiety. Reading them in sequence, which requires finding copies in multiple locations and noting the dates, tells a story of a society that could see what was coming and could not stop it. The last issue found in the game is dated the day before the bombs fell. Its headline discusses escalating tensions with China. The tone is urgent but not yet fully panicked. They had not yet understood that urgency was no longer sufficient. The glowing sea, the highly irradiated region in the southwestern corner of the map, corresponding to the area where the bombs impacted most directly, is one of the most atmospherically effective locations in the game. The landscape is practically devoid of detail beyond craters and destroyed buildings. The bombs here were too thorough for much to survive. But in the center of the glowing sea, there are locations: a bunker, a crashed military helicopter, evidence of what people attempted after the bombs fell. The bunker contains documentation that someone, in the immediate aftermath of the war, tried to establish a scientific monitoring station in the middle of what was already becoming the most irradiated zone in the region. They were measuring radiation levels, recording atmospheric data, trying to understand what had happened. The documentation ends when the radiation overwhelmed their protective gear. West Virginia's deeper myths. Fallout 76's treatment of West Virginia folklore is worth exploring in much greater depth, because it represents one of the franchise's most sophisticated approaches to Easter egg design, taking genuine cultural material and integrating it so thoroughly into the game's fiction that players who know the real folklore experience the game differently from those who do not. The Mothman of Point Pleasant is a real piece of American folklore. In 1966 and 1967, residents of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, reported sightings of a large, winged creature with glowing red eyes. The sightings occurred over a period of approximately 13 months and were concentrated in an area that had been used as a weapons manufacturing site during World War II. The collapse of the Silver Bridge over the Ohio River in December 1967, which killed 46 people, became connected in local mythology to the Mothman sightings. The creature was interpreted as either a warning or an omen of the disaster. John Keel's 1975 book The Mothman Prophecies documented the reports and became the primary text through which the legend was spread nationally. And Richard Gere starred in a film adaptation in 2002. Fallout 76 places Point Pleasant in the southern section of its map and fills it with Mothman-related content. The Mothman Museum, the statue of the creature that exists in real Point Pleasant, the documentation of the cult that formed around the creature in the game's fiction. The game's Mothman is real. It appears as an actual creature that players can encounter, typically near bodies of water and specifically near nuclear sites, which connects to the original folklore's association with industrial sites. The cult documentation scattered through Point Pleasant and surrounding areas describes a pre-war religious movement that interpreted the Mothman's appearances as divine communication. Their theology developed specific doctrines about what the Mothman's appearances meant and what behaviors would be rewarded or punished by its attention. Reading through the full extent of this documentation from early uncertain holotapes about whether the sightings are genuine to later, confident theological treatises traces the development of a genuine religious system from initial experiences. The Flatwoods monster has its own dedicated area in the game, associated with the real West Virginia town of Flatwoods, where a 1,952 encounter was reported. The Flatwoods monster description from that incident: a large, glowing figure with a pulsing red face observed by a group of locals in a field, is translated into Fallout 76 as a specific creature type, the alien, which appears in connection with the Flatwoods location. The documentation around this creature suggests that Fallout 76's world history includes genuine extraterrestrial contact at Flatwoods, integrated into the Fallout universe's existing treatment of alien visitors. The Grafton monster, a cryptid associated with the West Virginia town of Grafton, appears as a headless bipedal creature wandering the banks of the Tygart Valley River. The original Grafton monster was described in a 1964 newspaper report as a large, white, rubbery creature without a visible head. Fallout 76's version is a reasonably faithful interpretation, scaled to the game's aesthetic. The creature is aggressive, territorial, and considerably more difficult to deal with than its relatively obscure folklore origin might suggest. Finding and fighting a Grafton monster near an actual river that bears the same name as the town from the original sighting creates a pleasing geographical coherence. This is not a creature dropped randomly into the landscape, but one placed where its legend places it. The Wendigo, a creature from Algonquian folklore associated with cannibalism and winter starvation, a human being transformed into a predatory spirit by the act of consuming human flesh, appears in Fallout 76 as a specific creature type found in mountainous and forested areas of the map. The game's lore around the Wendigo connects it to the real folklore through a specific explanation of how extreme hunger and desperation in the post-war period produced the conditions under which the transformation occurred. This explanation is found in documentary evidence in the game, a researcher's notes, a cult leader's writings that ties the creature's existence to specific historical events in the fictional West Virginia timeline. The Snallygaster, a fictional cryptid from Maryland and West Virginia that appears in 19th century newspaper reports as a cross between a bird and a reptile, likely invented as a newspaper hoax, appears in Fallout 76 as a flying creature that nests in abandoned industrial areas. The game takes this relatively obscure entry in American cryptid folklore and gives it a concrete form in its world, a form that is consistent with the historical descriptions while fitting into the game's specific aesthetic of biological mutation and post-war aberration. The treatment of all these folkloric creatures in Fallout 76 reflects a particular design philosophy. Take the specific mythology of the chosen setting seriously as a source of content. Treat the folklore of West Virginia as subject matter worthy of careful, creative engagement, and let the resulting creatures carry the weight of their actual historical significance to the communities that produce the legends. This is Easter egg design at its most culturally engaged, not simply referencing a piece of pop culture for recognition, but drawing from a living tradition of regional mythology that has real meaning to real people. The philosophy of incompletion. The cut content of the Fallout series raises a philosophical question that is worth sitting with. What is a game when the things that are not in it are as interesting as the things that are. The Van Buren project interplays internally developed Fallout 3, cancelled in 2003 before Bethesda acquired the license, is the most significant piece of Fallout content that never existed. Van Buren, named after President Martin Van Buren as part of a Black Isle convention of naming projects after presidents, was being developed by a team that included many of the people who had created Fallout 1 and 2. Its design documents, released by Black Isle after the project was cancelled, describe a game set in the southwest Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, with a story involving a nuclear-powered prison, a cannibal community, a water supply crisis, and a conflict between competing visions for how to rebuild civilization. Many of the ideas developed for Van Buren eventually appeared in Fallout New Vegas. The Burned Man, a character who would have been a major antagonist in Van Buren, became Joshua Graham, one of New Vegas's most memorable characters, in the Honest Hearts DLC. The setting of the Colorado region appeared in New Vegas's Lonesome Road DLC. Caesar's Legion, the Roman Empire-inspired slavers who serve as one of New Vegas's main factions, was developed from Van Buren design documents. Obsidian's team, working on New Vegas, were many of the same people who had worked on Van Buren, and they brought their unfinished game's best ideas with them. This creates an interesting category of Easter egg, the indirect reference, the development of a thing that already existed but in a form only its creators had seen. Players who know Van Buren's design history experience Honest Hearts differently. They see Joshua Graham as both himself and the echo of a cancelled project, a character who got a second chance through the accident of franchise sale and studio formation. The cancelled Fallout, Brotherhood of Steel 2, which would have been the sequel to the maligned console spin-off, was much further along in development than Van Buren before being scrapped. Its design documents reveal a story that would have significantly expanded the lore of the Calculator, an artificial intelligence enemy from Fallout Tactics, into a full narrative. The game would have been set in Texas, adding a new region to the Fallout universe that the series has still not explored in any released game. Some of the concepts developed for Brotherhood of Steel 2 are reflected in later games' treatment of artificial intelligence and automation. The questions the project was asking about machine consciousness and human-machine conflict are questions that Fallout 4 eventually addressed. From different angles, the Fallout 3 project that preceded the Bethesda version, an internally developed Bethesda game sometimes called Fallout 3, Van Buren's spiritual successor in development documents, though this is not an official name, went through multiple design phases before settling on the Capital Wasteland setting. Earlier iterations considered setting the game in various other parts of the United States, including Texas and the Pacific Northwest. The decision to use Washington, D.C. was made partly for its symbolic resonance. A ruined seat of government is a powerful statement about what the war destroyed, and partly for the practical design opportunity that a dense, well-known city center surrounded by suburbs and countryside offered. The signatures within signatures. The tradition of developer self-reference in Fallout extends into territory that is less obviously Easter egg and more genuinely philosophical when examined carefully. When Tim Kane's epitaph says, "Founder, lover, fighter, programmer," it is not just a funny tribute. It is a complete description of a human being in 4 words, and the context a wasteland gravestone gives it a weight that a credits page would not. Kane built something, loved people, engaged in conflict, wrote code. The gravestone acknowledges that all of these things were true of a person and that they are now reduced to words on a marker in fictional dirt. This is what the best Fallout Easter eggs do. They take something small, a joke, a name, a reference, and put it in a context that makes it mean more than it would anywhere else. The wasteland is a place where meaning has to be actively recovered from the ruins. The Easter eggs participate in that recovery. Leonard Boyarsky's Vault Boy has a quality that the best mascots share. It communicates something true about the thing it represents. The Vault Boy's cheerfulness is not simply ironic. It is, in the Fallout universe, adaptive behavior, the human capacity to put on a good face, to project optimism in the face of circumstances that do not warrant it, to do the thumbs up even when the world is on fire. This is not cynical. This is human. People are remarkably good at managing affect in difficult circumstances, at performing normality when abnormality is everywhere. The Vault Boy was designed by a specific person with a specific aesthetic sensibility, inspired by a board game associated with wealth and commerce, developed into a mascot for a company that killed its own customers. And now it grins from every menu screen. from perk cards and status displays, from merchandise and posters and countless player avatars. The original design choice has accumulated meaning over nearly 30 years that none of its creators could have predicted. This is what happens to good symbols. They grow past their origins. The developers who came after Boyarsky, who worked with the Vault Boy without having designed him, have each put something of themselves into how he is deployed. Different games use him differently, with more irony in some, with more warmth in others, with different relationships between his cheerfulness and the darkness surrounding him. This variation is its own kind of hidden content, the evidence of different sensibilities working with the same symbol, each finding something different to say with it. The voice actors of the franchise have their own tradition of Easter eggs. Ron Perlman, who has narrated the opening and closing of every mainline Fallout game with his distinctive bass voice, is as much a part of the franchise's DNA as any visual element. His voice delivers the franchise's most famous line, "War. War never changes." And the specific weight and rhythm of that delivery has been analyzed and appreciated in depth by the community. The line itself is an Easter egg of sorts, a statement so deliberately simple, so apparently obvious, that it rewards thinking about rather than accepting at face value. Does war never change? Is that true? Is it a comfort or a warning? The line is different every time it plays, depending on what you have just done and where you are in the story. The long game. The Fallout series has been running for nearly 30 years. In that time, the specific people who created it have moved to different studios, retired, passed away, or continued working in circumstances very different from the ones in which they first built this world. The franchise they created has been maintained by different hands, interpreted by different teams, adapted for television by yet another group of people with their own vision for what it should be. What persists through all of this change is the Easter egg tradition. Every team that has touched a Fallout game has hidden things in it. Every studio has signed its work in some way. Every game has rewarded the patient, curious player with something that cannot be found by playing quickly or superficially. This persistence is not an accident. It reflects something true about what it means to build a world carefully. You do not just build the visible parts. You build the hidden parts too, because the hidden parts are part of what makes the visible parts feel real. A world with secrets is a world that behaves like the actual world, where meaning is rarely on the surface and where patience is almost always rewarded. The last Easter egg, the one that might be the most profound, is the simplest one. Fallout tells you, through every game in its series, that it is worth looking carefully, that the things hiding in the edges of your vision deserve attention, that slowing down in a genre that often rewards aggression and speed is its own kind of gameplay. The wasteland rewards the wanderer who takes their time, the person who reads the terminals, the person who investigates the posed skeletons, the person who climbs up to rooftops to see what someone left there, the person who listens to what the radio is actually playing rather than treating it as background sound. These are the people the franchise was built for. These are the people the developers were imagining when they hid the things they hid. And if you are the kind of person who sits with a long video about hidden things in old games, who finds something satisfying about the slow accumulation of detail, who likes the feeling of understanding something thoroughly rather than quickly, then Fallout was made for you specifically. The wasteland is enormous. There is always more to find. There is always another terminal to read, another arrangement of bones to interpret, another signal to follow through static. Take your time. The ruins will wait. Thank you for watching. If you found this worth your time, and I hope you did, a like lets more people find their way here, and a subscription means you will be here for whatever comes next. The wasteland is enormous. We have a long way still to go. See you out there. The lore of Nuka-Cola, and what a soda can tells you. There is no product in gaming fiction more thoroughly realized than Nuka-Cola. The fictional soft drink that has appeared in every Fallout game since the original, Nuka-Cola has been developed over nearly 3 decades into something that functions as a complete commercial mythology, with variant flavors, manufacturing history, marketing campaigns, competition with rival brands, corporate scandal, and the specific way its ubiquity in the wasteland tells you something about the pre-war economy it emerged from. Nuka-Cola was created by John Caleb Bradburton, a fictional entrepreneur whose name combines John Pemberton, the actual creator of Coca-Cola, with references to other real-world figures associated with American commercial culture. The drink debuted, within the game's fiction, in 2044, 20 years before the Great War, and grew in the subsequent decades to become the dominant soft drink in the United States. achieving a market presence so total that finding a Nuka-Cola bottle or cap in the wasteland is statistically almost guaranteed, regardless of which Fallout game you are playing or which region you are exploring. This ubiquity is itself a joke about American consumer culture, the reach of a branded product becoming so complete that its packaging outlasts the civilization that produced it by centuries. But the joke deepens when you start examining the specific variants. Nuka-Cola Quantum is perhaps the most famous variant, distinguished by its blue glow from added strontium isotopes. The blue glow makes the drink visible in the dark. It also renders it mildly radioactive. This was a pre-war product available commercially to consumers who apparently found the glow appealing enough that the mild radiation was not a deal-breaker. The marketing materials recovered throughout the games for Nuka-Cola Quantum do not significantly emphasize the radioactivity. This is the joke, and it lands differently the longer you think about it. Nuka-Cola Dark, found in Nuka World, has an alcohol content. It was marketed as an adult beverage, part of Nuka-Cola's expansion into the premium market in the years before the war. The cans are slightly larger than standard Nuka-Cola and have a more sophisticated label design. Bradburton's company understood that there was money in selling an adult version of a children's brand, and they executed it. Finding these cans in the Nuka World amusement park, among the ruins of a theme park built around the brand, creates a specific feeling. This corporation was serious enough about its product line to invest in multiple market segments, to build a theme park, to develop variant flavors and collector editions. And then the world ended and all of that seriousness is now archaeology. Nuka-Cola Cherry, Nuka-Cola Grape, Nuka-Cola Orange, the variants multiply across the games, each with their own specific effects on the player character and their own specific in-world marketing history. The Nuka-Cola machines scattered throughout every game in the series are individually modeled with period-appropriate design, featuring the same cheerful branding in the same yellow and red colors, varying only in which variant is advertised. They are time capsules of a specific aesthetic era, preserved in place by the apocalypse. The Nuka-Cola Corporation's internal documents, recoverable in Nuka World and in various game locations, reveal a company that was not simply a soft drink manufacturer, but a significant player in the pre-war political economy with government contracts, defense-adjacent research, and the kind of institutional relationships that corporations of that scale develop with the people who regulate them. The documents have the language of corporate communications so precisely rendered that they are genuinely uncomfortable to read, memo after memo, optimizing for profit while the world burns. The language never acknowledging that anything outside the specific subject of the memo matters. The real Nuka-Cola Quantum, the promotional product released through 7-11 in 2008 to coincide with Fallout 3's launch, is the point where the fiction reached furthest into the real world. The drink was actually blue achieved through food coloring and a specific formulation and was released in limited quantities at 7-11 stores in North America. Fans collected the bottles. The specific product, a fictional drink made real for a promotional period, became itself a collectible, a piece of the Fallout universe that you could hold in your hand, that existed in physical space, that smelled like a convenience store and tasted approximately like what you might expect blue soda to taste like. The caps from Nuka-Cola bottles became the currency of the wasteland through a chain of reasoning that the games document across terminal entries and character dialogue. In the immediate aftermath of the war, someone noticed that bottle caps were plentiful, durable, difficult to counterfeit, and uniform enough in size and material to serve as a reliable unit of exchange. The specific decision that established caps as currency is attributed in some game documentation to a specific merchant at a specific location who began refusing to accept pre-war money and accepting only caps. The habit spread. The economy adapted. The trash of the old world became the money of the new one. This is the kind of detail that Fallout rewards tracking across multiple games. The reason caps work as currency is not arbitrary. It has a history. That history is documented, recoverable, meaningful. The Easter egg is not a single item or reference, but the full chain of reasoning that explains why you are spending bottle caps to buy ammunition in the year 2281. The hauntings of specific locations. Every Fallout game contains locations that accumulate around them a specific quality of atmosphere, places where the combination of environmental design, audio, and discovered lore creates something that functions like genuine unease. The Salem area in Fallout 4 is one of these locations. Salem, Massachusetts is famous for the witch trials of 1692, and Bethesda's team made deliberate use of that association. The in-game Salem is home to a specific forged raider group, occupying a tannery, but the surrounding area contains environmental details that reference the historical trials, including an unmarked location called the Salem Witch Museum, though the actual museum in real Salem is a visitor attraction rather than a historical site. Finding the specific combination of elements in and around Salem that reference the witch trial history requires attention to both the visual environment and the readable content. The Fort Hagen facility, also in Fallout 4, is connected to the main story but contains environmental details in its lower levels that tell a story separate from the quest. The facility was a pre-war military installation that survived the bombs and has since been taken over by a specific faction. Its lower levels contain evidence of its original function in documentation that the main quest never references the specific research conducted here, the specific personnel, the specific decisions made. Players who explore these levels thoroughly develop a picture of the facility that is more complete than what the quest alone provides. The concept of the unmarked location, a place that exists in the game world, has been designed with deliberate content, but that is not flagged by any map marker or quest, is one of Fallout's most effective tools for rewarding exploration. These locations are, definitionally, Easter eggs, hidden content with no guidance toward it. Finding an unmarked location requires actually wandering, which is increasingly rare in modern game design. The franchise's commitment to placing significant content in unmarked locations is a statement of trust in players, the acknowledgement that some people will go off the marked path, and that those people deserve something for their curiosity. The underwater content in various Fallout games exists in this tradition. Submerging yourself in the waterways of the Capital Wasteland, the lakes of the Mojave, or the Charles River of the Commonwealth, and exploring the bottom reveals content that exists specifically because someone knew a small number of players would go looking. Not everything found underwater is spectacular, much of it is simply the visual texture of a submerged world. The specific way environmental objects look through the murky water, the way sound behaves differently in that space. But occasionally, submerged locations contain specific content. A crashed vehicle, a sealed container, evidence of something that happened at depth rather than on the surface. The Corvega assembly plant in Fallout 4 contains, in its upper levels, a view of the surrounding Commonwealth that is among the game's most visually striking. It also contains, in its ruined production lines, the specific evidence of what the plant was making. The Corvega, the atomic-powered car of the pre-war world, whose rusted and decaying hulks dot the landscape everywhere the player goes. Seeing the production line that made these cars understanding, spatially, how they were assembled, and in what quantities transforms the abandoned cars from atmospheric detail into historical artifact. Every Corvega in the wasteland passed through a line like this one. The Dunwich borers in Fallout 4 extends the Lovecraftian thread that began with Fallout 3's Dunwich building. Workers at the quarry became progressively more disturbed as they dug deeper, their holotapes documenting increasing erratic behavior, strange visions, and ultimately violent events. The deepest level of the quarry contains something that the holotapes around it are unwilling to name directly. The workers describe it in terms of feeling and perception rather than direct observation, as if direct observation was not possible. This strategy of describing horror through its effects on witnesses, rather than describing the horror itself, is directly from Lovecraft's playbook, and Bethesda's team understood it well enough to execute it convincingly. The music that plays when no one is listening. The ambient music of the Fallout series, the tracks that play in specific locations, rather than over the radio, was composed specifically for each game and each location, creating audio environments that shape the player's experience in ways that operate below conscious awareness. Enon Zur, who composed the ambient scores for Fallout 3, New Vegas, 4, and 76, developed a musical language for the franchise that is distinct from the licensed pre-war music of the radio stations. Where the radio music is warm, familiar, and deliberately nostalgic, Zur's ambient compositions are textural and uncertain, built from sustained tones and gradual harmonic shifts that suggest a world whose stability cannot be trusted. The specific techniques Zur uses, extended techniques and strings, electronic processing, unusual instrumental combinations create a sound that could not have been made before the digital era, which is itself slightly at odds with the franchise's 1950s aesthetic. This tension is part of the effect. The music sounds like the wasteland looks, simultaneously rooted in a specific period and transformed into something unrecognizable. The ambient track that plays inside Vault 111 at the start of Fallout 4 is one of the most effective pieces of location-specific music in any game. The Vault's opening sequence establishes the pre-war world in careful, warm detail: a real home, a real morning, real people. The music during this sequence is domestic and comfortable. Then the alarm sounds, and the music changes, and the evacuation begins, and the vault door opens, and everything that follows is scored differently. The contrast between the pre-war musical language and the post-war musical language is as precise as the contrast in the visual design of the two eras. Music, in Fallout 4, is another layer of world-building. The specific songs that end up in the licensed soundtrack of each game are worth examining for their selection logic. In Fallout 3, Three Dogs Galaxy News Radio plays tracks that skew toward the late 1940s and 1950s recordings, with a genuine period feel, many of them by artists who were actively popular in that era. In New Vegas, New Vegas's station plays a selection that leans more heavily into the Las Vegas entertainment tradition. Big band, cocktail jazz, the sound of a specific city's specific nightlife. In Fallout 4, Diamond City Radio curates a somewhat more eclectic selection, reflecting the Commonwealth's more diverse cultural inheritance. The choice of opening song for each game's promotional materials has itself become a tradition. Anything Goes by Cole Porter for Fallout 4, maybe, for various promotional uses, It's All Over But the Crying. These choices carry the franchise's emotional temperature into the media surrounding each game, presetting players' expectations before they have played a second. The music box available as a settlement item in Fallout 4, a functional pre-war object that plays a specific tune when activated, is a small Easter egg in itself. The tune it plays is a simplified version of the Fallout theme, the musical signature of the franchise, rendered in the mechanical simplicity of a music box rather than an orchestral score. Finding this object, placing it in a settlement, and hearing the Fallout theme emerge from its tiny spinning cylinder is a moment of self-referential warmth, the franchise acknowledging its own history through the most intimate and domestic of instruments. The perks of knowing things. The perk systems of the Fallout games, the upgrades and abilities that players can select to improve their characters, have always contained their own layer of Easter eggs and references, embedded in the names, images, and descriptions of individual perks. The Vault Boy images that accompany each perk in Fallout 3 and New Vegas are miniature cartoons that illustrate the perk's effect through the Vault Boy's body language and situation. These illustrations were individually created for each perk and contain their own humor. The Vault Boy demonstrating increased damage by looking comically aggressive, or demonstrating better sneaking by looking comically small, or demonstrating nuclear damage resistance by looking comically cheerful while standing in a blast zone. Each one is a small piece of art that rewards looking at directly rather than simply reading the perk name and moving on. The perk names themselves carry references in some cases. Almost Perfect in Fallout 3 is a direct reference to the game's special system. Taking the perk raises all of your attributes to 9, one below the maximum, and to the philosophical position that near perfection is achievable, but true perfection is not. The name carries weight beyond its mechanical description. In New Vegas, Even Odds is a perk available to characters with high luck, and its name is a comment on the paradox of probability. Even odds means a 50-50 chance, which sounds fair but means that things are just as likely to go badly as well. For a wasteland survivor, even odds is optimistic. The perk system's vocabulary reflects the moral philosophy of the franchise. Not that things work out, but that they might, and that is enough to keep going. The challenge system in New Vegas, a set of meta objectives that grant bonuses when completed, contains references as deep as any other part of the game. Even a God King Can Bleed requires crippling Caesar's head with throwing spears, a reference to the Battle of Thermopylae, as depicted in Frank Miller's graphic novel and Zack Snyder's film adaptation, 300, in which Leonidas of Sparta scores a glancing blow on the Persian king Xerxes with a thrown spear, demonstrating that even a man who claims divine status can be hurt. The challenge asks players to literally prove the same point to Caesar, a character who has built his entire power structure around the image of Roman imperial invincibility. Nuke It from Orbit is a challenge name that references aliens, specifically the line "nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure," spoken by Ellen Ripley as a recommended response to the alien infestation. The challenge in the game involves dealing with a problem through overwhelming force rather than surgical precision. The reference works because it captures a specific emotional register, the decision to stop trying to manage a situation and simply destroy everything that contains it. The world that broadcasts to itself? The radio stations of the Fallout series function as a kind of Greek chorus voices, commenting on the events of the game world from a specific perspective, giving players information they might not otherwise receive, creating the sense of a world that continues beyond the player's direct experience. Three Dog's Galaxy News Radio is the most famous example, but it is worth examining how he functions as an Easter egg delivery system. Three Dog regularly broadcasts news updates that react to the player's actions, including some actions that most players will never take, which means Three Dog has dialogue recorded for situations that will be heard by very few people. If you help certain obscure faction members with tasks that have no direct quest attached, Three Dog may report on it. If you make specific decisions in quests that seem to have no significant effect on the main story, Three Dog may comment on the ripple effects. The radio station creates the impression of a world in which your actions have consequence, even when the game's quest structure does not explicitly acknowledge them. This is one of the most elegant Easter egg systems in the franchise, using a single recurring character and a familiar medium radio to create the sensation of being observed and commented upon by the world you are changing. Finding the specific Three Dog broadcasts that reference things you have done, things that seemed unimportant, creates a specific satisfaction that few game mechanics can replicate. Mr. New Vegas, voiced by Wayne Newton, broadcasts on the New Vegas radio station with a different energy, less activist than Three Dog, more entertainingly detached. His commentary on the Mojave's events is drier and more deadpan, in keeping with the aesthetic of a Las Vegas lounge performer who has seen everything and reacts to most of it with professional warmth and studied removal. Finding his specific responses to major story events, including some endings and decisions, reveals a carefully constructed version of what a pre-war style entertainer might actually say about an apocalyptic political situation, which is to say, he says it genially, without fully acknowledging the stakes, and somehow that makes it funnier and sadder than either emotion alone. Fallout 76's radio system creates a different set of Easter eggs because the world it broadcasts into is a multiplayer environment. The music that plays over Appalachian radio represents a curation of pre-war West Virginia culture that is specific to the region country, bluegrass, the specific traditions of Appalachian music that differ significantly from the big band and orchestral pop that dominates earlier game stations. This is not simply a different playlist, but a statement about the regional culture of the specific place the game is set. Appalachian musical traditions are as distinctive as Appalachian cryptid folklore, and both are taken seriously as sources of authentic detail. The Pied Piper iBot's music, the specific tunes it plays while leading its train of rats, is drawn from actual children's songs and folk tunes associated with the Pied Piper legend. Recognizing the source material requires some familiarity with European folk music traditions, which makes the encounter function differently for different players. A delightful visual joke for everyone who encounters it, a deeper reference for those who know the specific musical traditions being invoked. What the Wasteland teaches. The Fallout universe has been teaching the same lesson for nearly 30 years, through every game and every Easter egg hidden within them. Attention is its own reward. The player who pays attention to the terminal in the corner, instead of rushing to the exit, finds the story behind the story. The player who reads the holotape, instead of simply taking the associated item, understands what the item means. The player who investigates the skeleton instead of stepping over it, understands who was there before them. This is not a lesson that games typically teach, in an era of quest markers and map pings and objective arrows. Most games assume that players want to be guided efficiently to the content. Fallout assumes that players want to find the content, and that finding it is different from being guided to it. The Easter eggs are proof of this philosophy. They exist without guidance. They exist without markers. They exist because someone decided that the world should be worth exploring even in its unmarked corners, that curiosity should find something waiting for it, that the act of paying close attention to a fictional world should produce understanding that purely mechanical engagement cannot. The specific people who put these things in the games are real humans with real lives and real creative personalities. Tim Kane's exploding head is the joke of a specific person. The Nuka-Cola Quantum's real-world manifestation is the decision of a specific marketing team. The pose of the skeleton near Summersville Lake is the choice of a specific level designer who knew someone would find it and wanted to give them something when they did. Easter eggs are acts of communication from developers to players across the distance of a completed product. They say, "We were here, we made this, we thought of you specifically, we left something for you." They are the most personal form of game design. And in a franchise as vast as Fallout, they are also the most intimate. The wasteland is enormous. It holds more than any single player can find. There are secrets in these games that have been there for 27 years and have still not been found, or that have been found and reported so obscurely that most of the community has never heard of them. The archaeology of the Fallout universe is ongoing. It will probably never be complete. That is exactly how it should be. Thank you for listening tonight. Wherever you are, whatever time it is where you sit or lie or rest, the wasteland has been here waiting. It will be here when you come back. The secrets will keep. Sleep well. The art of the pause, resting in the wasteland. There is a moment in nearly every Fallout game where the player stops moving. Not because the game asks them to, not because there is a loading screen, or a cutscene, or a mechanical pause. They simply stop, because something in the environment has earned stillness. Sometimes it is a view, the ruined skyline of Washington visible from a hilltop, or the neon shimmer of New Vegas in the distance as you crest a ridge and see it laid out below you for the first time, or the specific quality of light in the glowing sea at a certain angle that makes the irradiated air look almost beautiful. Sometimes it is a piece of music that the radio happens to be playing at exactly the moment when the visual is at its most affecting. Sometimes it is the discovery of a skeleton that you stay with for a moment before moving on. These moments are the franchise's deepest Easter eggs, in a sense not hidden content, but hidden capacity. The game contains spaces for the player to pause, arranged deliberately by designers who understood that a good open world needs breathing room. The ruined bench at the edge of a cliff, positioned with a view, the shelter from the radiation storm that happens to face west toward the evening light, the abandoned campsite with a fire still technically burning through some pre-war mechanism, warm in the middle of a cold landscape. None of these are explicitly Easter eggs. They are simply the evidence of designers caring about what the space they are building feels like, caring enough to put a bench somewhere beautiful, to arrange sight lines so that emerging from a location produces a view worth seeing, to let the musical curation run long enough in certain areas that the right song has time to find the right moment. The Prydwen's deck in Fallout 4, the roof of the Brotherhood of Steel's airship, offers one of the game's broadest perspectives on the Commonwealth. The settlement building of Spectacle Island, perched at the eastern edge of the map, provides a sense of oceanic distance that the interior of the map cannot replicate. The roof of Diamond City's market offers a view of the entire settlement that makes the scale of what humans have built there in the ruins of a baseball stadium suddenly land emotionally rather than just logistically. Fallout 76's terrain is, by the standards of the series, the most physically beautiful the mountains of West Virginia, rendered with a fidelity to real Appalachian landscape that rewards simply walking through it. The deciduous forests, the rivers, the specific texture of the rock faces in the Highland Marsh region, these are things that take time to appreciate, that reveal themselves gradually rather than presenting themselves in one spectacular image. The game asks for a slower kind of attention. This is what the long-form Easter egg, the environmental story, the character detail, the lore fragment always asks for. Not the quick recognition of a pop culture reference, but the sustained attention that allows you to understand what you are looking at. The Fallout series has always believed that players willing to give that sustained attention deserve something back for it. Every terminal entry is there because someone thought someone would read it. Every skeleton arrangement is there because someone thought someone would stop and look. The architecture of vaults as Easter eggs. The vaults themselves, as designed spaces, encode their experiments in their architecture. Playing through a vault and paying attention to how it is physically organized, what kinds of rooms exist, what their relative sizes suggest about their intended use, what has been modified from standard vault design tells you something about the experiment being conducted before you find any documentation. Vault 81, in Fallout 4, has a medical wing that is physically larger than standard vault medical facilities. The equipment in that wing is more elaborate. The specific types of examination equipment present are unusual for a general population vault. All of this is visible before you read a single terminal entry about what the vault was designed to do. The architecture is the Easter egg, pointing toward the lore that explains it. Vault 11 in New Vegas has a specific room configuration in its atrium area that does not make obvious sense until you understand the vault's experiment. The atrium is where the annual sacrifice would take place, the space where the community would gather, where the choice would be made, where the social dynamics of the experiment would be most concentrated. Its size, its centrality, its relationship to the other spaces in the vault, these are architectural choices that reflect the specific social pressure the vault was designed to produce. The room communicates its purpose to players paying attention before the terminal entries confirm it. The vault's color palette, the institutional green and gray of the walls, the specific yellow-green of the lighting, the deliberate mid-century design language of every fixture and fitting is itself an Easter egg about the period these facilities were built. Real nuclear shelters built in the United States in the 1950s and 1960s have a specific aesthetic that Fallout's vaults reference accurately. The same institutional colors, the same attempt to make an inherently unpleasant environment feel livable through design choices that were understood as optimistic in their era. Visiting a real Cold War-era civil defense shelter and then playing a Fallout game is a disorienting experience because the reference is so precise. The specific promotional art for the various Vault models, Vault-Tech's marketing materials that appear on posters and in holotapes throughout the games, is illustrated in a style directly referencing real 1950s-era government safety pamphlets and commercial advertising. The specific typography, the specific illustration style, the specific way the Vault Boy is posed in these materials, all of these are accurate pastiches of real-world graphic design from a specific decade. The Easter egg for players who know that graphic design history is in recognizing how well the research was done, how precisely the reference was targeted. The numbered vault system also functions as an Easter egg system for players who have done their homework. Each vault number across multiple games corresponds to a specific experiment, and some of the numbers carry their own implicit references. Vault 77. The Puppet Man Vault from the Penny Arcade comic has a number that feels slightly arbitrary, but 77 is also the year Star Wars was released, which is the kind of number choice that developers sometimes make for reasons they do not document. Vault 101's number is 101, which in binary represents 5, and there are 5 special stats that define your character in ways relevant to escaping that vault, or it is simply a roundish number. The Fallout Wiki community has investigated these potential connections at great length, with conclusions ranging from definitely intentional to almost certainly coincidental depending on who you ask. This uncertainty is its own Easter egg of sorts. The franchise is dense enough with deliberate meaning that players cannot always be sure where the intention ends and the pattern finding begins. This interpretive richness is a quality of great creative works. They are complex enough that you can read them in multiple ways, and the reading that finds more meaning is not necessarily wrong just because it finds more than the creator intended. The long friendship of Fallout and science fiction literature. The original Fallout games were built by people who had grown up on classic science fiction, and the franchise has maintained a consistent relationship with the tradition of the literature throughout its history. The Easter eggs and references in Fallout are not just to films and television, they extend into the literary tradition that those films and shows drew from. Isaac Asimov's 3 Laws of Robotics, the foundational ethical framework for robots in science fiction, specifying that robots must not harm humans, must obey humans except when this conflicts with the first law, and must protect their own existence except when this conflicts with the first 2 laws, is referenced directly in Fallout 4 through the Institute's synthetic humans. The question of whether the Institute's synths qualify as robots under Asimov's framework, and therefore whether the 3 laws apply to them, is a legitimate philosophical puzzle raised by the game's narrative. The synths are designed to be functionally indistinguishable from humans. Do the 3 laws apply to beings that pass the Turing test? Fallout 4 raises this question without answering it, in keeping with Asimov's own approach in his later robot novels. Philip K. Dick's questions about what constitutes authentic humanity, whether artificial beings can have genuine experience, whether memory makes identity, whether the distinction between real and simulated experience is meaningful, run through Fallout 4's synth storyline in ways that feel specifically influenced by works like Do Androids Dream of Electric, Sheep, and A Scanner Darkly. The specific anxiety of Nick Valentine, a synth who carries the memories of a human police officer who died before the war, is Dickian in its precise form. The question of whether the memories are authentic experience or simply data, whether the grief they produce is real grief or real seeming grief, and whether that distinction matters. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451, with its depiction of a society that has suppressed books in favor of wall-sized entertainment screens, is referenced through the Fallout universe's own relationship with knowledge and its preservation. The followers of the apocalypse, who appear in New Vegas, are specifically dedicated to preserving pre-war knowledge books, medical techniques, scientific understanding in the face of a world that frequently destroys knowledge as readily as it destroys everything else. Their mission echoes Bradbury's Firemen in reverse. Where Bradbury's protagonists burn books, the followers preserve them, against the same argument that knowledge is dangerous. The library in Fallout 3, the Capitol Building's Congressional Library, now occupied by a Brotherhood Outcasts faction searching for pre-war technology, contains in its depths a collection of terminals documenting pre-war American literature. The titles and authors mentioned are real, and the selection reflects someone's genuine understanding of the American literary canon. Finding these terminals in the middle of a combat-focused dungeon crawl location is the kind of tonal surprise that Fallout specializes in. The game takes you somewhere, and then makes you feel something different from what you expected to feel there. The Star Trek reference in Fallout 2, The Guardian of Forever, the time portal from the original series episode The City on the Edge of Forever, is drawn from one of the most emotionally resonant episodes in science fiction television. That episode involves a time travel situation in which preventing a tragedy in the past will cause a greater tragedy in the future, and the central character must allow someone he loves to die rather than save them. The portal that appears in Fallout 2 does not reproduce the episode's emotional content. It is a reference rather than a retelling. But choosing that specific piece of Star Trek as an Easter egg suggests an awareness of what makes that episode significant, which goes beyond simple recognition of a famous shape. The Terminator franchise makes an appearance in Fallout 3's design, through the specific visual language of the Brotherhood of Steel's power armor in certain close-up shots, through the specific texture of automated defenses in certain locations, and through the general premise of human civilization destroyed by the machines it built, though in Fallout the machines are secondary to the humans who chose to use them, which is itself a commentary on the Terminator franchise's slightly too convenient displacement of human responsibility onto technological inevitability. Small hours in the Capitol Wasteland. It is late. Wherever you are, it is probably quiet now. The world has settled into whatever shape it takes in its quietest hours, and if you are still here, still listening, still moving slowly through these details and stories, then you have given this the kind of time that makes it worth making. There are things about the Fallout series that are harder to categorize as Easter eggs, but that belong in this conversation anyway. The way the game's day-night cycle changes the quality of light over specific locations, the specific warmth of afternoon sun on the ruined facade of a hotel in New Vegas, the specific pale blue of early morning in the Capitol Wasteland. These are not Easter eggs. They are just evidence of visual care, of designers and artists who thought carefully about time as well as place. The specific way that NPCs and settlements go about their routines, the merchant who opens their stall in the morning, the guard who changes position at dusk, the settler who sits outside in the evening and then returns indoors, is not Easter eggs but simulation. The game pretending that life continues even when the player is not looking directly at it. This pretense is the most atmospheric thing a game world can do. Give the impression that it exists whether or not it is being observed. The Fallout franchise at its best creates the feeling that you have arrived in a world that was happening before you got there and will continue happening after you leave. The Easter eggs are part of what creates this feeling, the sense that the world is dense enough to contain hidden things, that people were here before the player arrived and left traces of themselves. The broader world building reinforces it through the simulation of ongoing life. The specific detail of how time passes in Fallout games, how many in-game days equal real-world hours, how seasons do not change because the radiation in the atmosphere has altered weather patterns, how the passage of time is felt but never specified creates a particular relationship between player time and game time. You can spend what feels like a month in a specific city, negotiating with its factions and exploring its corners, and come back to it the next day in real life and feel that nothing has changed in your absence. The game does not punish absence, it waits. This waiting quality, the sense that the wasteland is patient, that it has been there and will continue to be there, is one of the franchise's most underappreciated qualities. It makes the exploration feel unhurried in a way that most open-world games cannot achieve. You are not being moved toward an ending. You are simply in a world, and the world goes on around you, and there is always somewhere you have not yet looked. The Easter eggs will be there when you come back. The skeletons will still be arranged the same way, telling the same story they have always told, waiting for the player who will stop and read them correctly. The terminals will still hold their text, their unread messages, their small histories of lives that ended but left their words behind. The radio will still be playing. It always is. Good night. We will be here when you come back. The details that persist. One last thought before we rest. The reason the Fallout series continues to generate discussion, analysis, and discovery decades after its individual entries were released is that the franchise was built with an understanding that games are not consumed, they are inhabited. Players do not simply complete Fallout games, they live in them for extended periods, returning across years, finding things they missed on previous visits, understanding things they could not understand before they had more context. This inhabitation model of game design is relatively rare. Most games are built for a single, complete experience. Fallout games are built for repeated, evolving ones. The Easter eggs are part of this design philosophy. They exist to be found across multiple playthroughs, in different sequences, with different prior knowledge, producing different meanings depending on what the player brings to them. The Vault 11 tragedy means something different the first time you find it as a surprise, as a discovery, than it means the third time, when you know what you are reading and can pay attention to the specific language of each document rather than the sequence of events they describe. The Indiana Jones refrigerator in Goodsprings is funny the first time and nostalgic the fifth time, and then simply part of the landscape, a familiar landmark you nod to while passing through. The Vault Boy himself, encountered for the first time, is simply a cheerful mascot. Encountered after watching the television series, after understanding Cooper Howard's story, he carries an entire human tragedy on his cartoon shoulders. The Easter eggs age with the player who knows them. They do not stay the same. This is the deepest quality of the franchise's hidden content. It meets you wherever you are in your relationship with it, and it always has something more to offer. Keep exploring, keep reading, keep stopping to look at the skeletons. The wasteland rewards the patient. There is one more thing worth saying about the Fallout universe before we close entirely, something that gets at what makes it worth spending this kind of time with. Post-apocalyptic fiction, as a genre, has a tendency toward nihilism. The world has ended. What is the point of anything? The genre's most influential texts often land in despair. The road is empty, the survivors are brutal, the future is closed. Cormac McCarthy's The Road, which the franchise has clearly read, moves through its devastated landscape with a sense of moral survival that is admirable but grim. Most post-apocalyptic stories do not believe in the future. Fallout believes in the future. This is genuinely unusual and genuinely important. The franchise's central proposition, underneath all the dark humor and the institutional critique and the radiation and the mutants, is that people keep trying. Not because they will certainly succeed, not because the odds are good, but because the alternative, giving up, accepting that the wasteland is all there is worse than the work of rebuilding. The Easter eggs are part of this belief. Someone hid them there for someone else to find. That act of hiding, that anticipation of the player who will come looking, is itself a form of faith in the future. The developer who placed a skeleton on a beach chair with sunglasses was thinking, someday, someone will climb up here and laugh. That thought is hope. Quiet, small, specific hope, but hope. The wasteland is full of hopeful acts disguised as jokes. The Wadsworth robot telling puns in a ruined shack. The Nuka-Cola machine still trying to dispense product. The radio still broadcasting music that no one is left to dance to. Playing on anyway. Playing on anyway. That is what the franchise is about, underneath everything else. Playing on anyway. Sleep well, the wasteland will be there tomorrow. There will always be more to find.